Hello. Too loud, not loud enough? Can I have your attention, please? Too loud. Good?
Yeah.
Hey, Ryan, I'm up here with a microphone trying to talk. You're ignoring me. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for showing up tonight, guys. We really appreciate the support. And on behalf of all the Agamart groups, thanks for attending this session this evening. Hope you're ready to listen, learn, and participate. We're very fortunate to have two great guest speakers tonight. One's local, and one flew all the way in from London, Ontario. And his arm's tired. Whoa! Not one laugh, I'm dying up here. All right. You guys don't want to hear from me. So I'm going to invite our general managers from our Agamart groups to come up and speak for a few seconds. And then we're going to get into our guest speakers. So I'd like to invite Danny up. Round of applause, please.
So thank you for coming. And when we do things in Maine, you guys always participate big. So thank you for doing that. Technically, I don't have much to say right now. So technically, I'm not going to say technically again, right? You always get me right. Ryan's going to be a father too, so.
You shut the fuck up.
We're going to make you a nice baby shower.
Oh, yeah, it's going to cost you big time.
Oh, that's fine. So anyways, I want to say thank you, and I hope we have a better season than we did last year. I know everybody's having a hard time, and technically we want to learn a little bit of what the season has brought us and what we can do better. So I think we've done some trials with B in the University of Maine. It is telling us some stuff that we need to learn. And then Greg Patterson is going to go through a little bit of what the season went and what we can do better or learn from it. So I'll pass Andy. He's the manager at Heartland.
Thanks, Danny. I'm going to leave all the technical part up to Danny. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming. And if you're in the room, it means you represent a big chunk of business to both the Agamarts. And I'd like to thank, I think safe enough to thank on both of our behalfs for all the business you guys continue to support us with. Thank you very much for that. The suggestion I would make against tonight is we've all had a couple thousand calories to eat here in the last half hour. We're going to listen to some speakers, so don't be shy about getting up and going for a walk, or get a little nappy, then just get up and stretch, whatever you're going to do. But I've heard Greg speak a lot of times, known Greg for a long time. Don't hold back any questions. He does some of his best work under fire. So if you get any tough questions to ask, don't think about it on the way home in the truck and say, gee, I wish I would have asked about hollow heart, because I was kind of nervous about it. I didn't want someone to know I had a hollow heart. They didn't dare ask the question. Well, you can ask it here in this room, I think, because everybody's quite aware of what's going on. So there's a lot to be learned here, I think, from these guys tonight. And we'd like to thank you for coming and your support. Appreciate it.
Thank you. So our first speaker is going to be Bee Chim from the University of Maine at Presque. She's an assistant professor. She has her PhD in agronomy from Virginia Tech. How many years have you been with us in Maine?
3.5.
3.5 years. She's done really well for herself, making a name in our community and getting her voice out there and being heard. And she's going to be speaking about some micronutrient trials that she did over the summer. And actually, before I have you go up, we're going to play a couple of videos on YouTube, just a few minutes to showcase some of the technologies that we've been using here in the past couple of years. And then once you guys are exposed to that, Lee's going to speak about them. Thank you.
That's a nice coffee shop next.
I tried. Well, that's a different one. Put that one right up there.
How many?
high-yield crop systems require meticulous management. Getting the precise ratio of essential nutrients to the plant at the right time is critical. Applying the right fertilizer is key to improving efficiencies and increasing yield consistently and conveniently. Introducing Aspire, a superior boron delivery system developed by the Mosaic Company. Boron is the second most efficient micronutrient across soils in North America. Although required in small amounts, boron plays a key role in optimizing plant health. Ensuring your field has proper levels of boron can improve crop quality and pollination significantly. Through innovative Nutriform technology, Aspire combines two forms of boron with potassium in each granule for uniform nutrient distribution and season-long availability. For row crops like soybeans and corn, it's crucial to apply boron through the roots for optimal uptake. Aspire's flexible application window ensures boron is available during key growth periods when plants need it most to maximize yield potential. Experience peace of mind knowing your field is getting the nutrients needed to increase yield and productivity now and into the future. With Aspire, every acre is covered.
Just like humans, plants need food to grow. These foods include macronutrients such as N, P, and K, and micronutrients such as zinc, manganese, and boron. If any of these nutrients are lacking, the plant will suffer, and so will the yield and quality of the crop. Micronutrients are often overlooked when it comes to crop nutrition, but they are key to ensuring the highest crop quality and yield. Most micronutrient fertilizers are applied on the crop foliage or on the soil. When applied on the soil, micronutrients are usually part of a blended granular fertilizer mix. Soil applications are ideal because most of the nutrients are taken up by the plant via the root system. However, there are two things to consider with the use of blended micronutrients. First, handling bags at the blending site is labor-intensive and also produces a lot of dust, resulting in loss of essential micronutrients and money. Second, agronomically, a blended product does not provide an even distribution on the soil, and a limited number of feeding sites for the plants leave the crop starved of essential micronutrients. But what if each granule in the blend contained the required amount of micronutrient necessary for plant growth, crop yield, and quality? This is where liquid micronutrient coatings like YaraVita ProCoat excel. These liquid suspensions contain fine micronutrients that coat each particle in the blend, making sure every granule contains the right amount of micronutrients. Liquid coatings are easy to apply. They're simply sprayed in the blender via a pumping system, which requires no bags and it's virtually dust-free. No dust means better handling once the fertilizer is transported to the farm, and better spreading when it's applied to the field. Now, liquid coatings should not be confused with powder coatings, which tend to produce dust and loss of the micronutrient itself. Contrary to powders, liquid micronutrients stick to the surface of each granule, eliminating up to 32% of dust and micronutrient loss. A uniform coating equals an even distribution on the field. This leads to higher efficiency and better crop yield and quality. Research has shown that even distribution of nutrients means higher yields on crops such as corn, wheat, and cotton. This is why YaraVita ProCoat is an essential component of any crop nutrition program. And with each micronutrient easily identifiable by a different color, for instance, zinc is blue and copper is red, you can see the difference. That's why Yara calls the colors of yield YaraVita ProCoat.
I didn't mention it earlier, but we do have our representatives from Yara here. We have Emerson over here in the corner. We got Nick and Sean over there in the far corner. If you guys have any questions about these technologies, these are definitely the guys to go to and ask your questions. And up next we got Dee. There, your microphone should be on. I'll turn it up as we go. This is to move forward, and this is a pointer. That's back.
Hello. Can everyone hear me? Thanks for coming, and thanks for inviting me. So I'm going to talk about the effects of micronutrients on potato productions. This is the timeline, shortest that I can do. I'll give a brief introduction if you have never met me before, and then I'll say, well, what is all the micronutrients, and why is this important? And I'm just going to pinpoint these 3 micronutrients that we tested on, and how my field experiments done, and then some data analysis. So a little bit introduction of myself. This is a map of Malaysia. The line is the equator. I'm from Malaysia, and I came to the United States 2007. I currently work for the University of Maine Corporate Extension. My office is in Presque, and I'm an agronomist, so anything that related to any biological products, nutrient management, with the plant health and soil health, that's under my territory. I have my master's and bachelor's in Oklahoma State, focusing on nutrient management, so specifically nitrogen. Have my PhD in Virginia Tech, spent 2 years in South Dakota, working a lot with long-term rotation crop. They do up to 4 rotations in 20 years data. I do a lot of NDVI, NDRE prescribed nitrogens for corn and small grains. So currently, a lot of my project is mostly focused on phosphorus. So I'm still learning about phosphorus and also some micronutrients. This is something that I learned as I go. And also cover crops and precision ag and twin rows. So what are the micronutrients? You saw some of the slides here. There are 17 elements we need for plant essentials, nutrients. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. That's what blue color is. Here we go. The macronutrient that we all know, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. The secondary macronutrients, calcium, magnesium, sulfur. And then here's the list of all the micronutrients. So there are boron, fluorines, copper, iron, manganese, molybdenum, nickels, and zinc. They contain less than 1% of the dry matter. So they're a really small amount, but they're very essential. So why is it important? I highlighted a couple of points. They're essential for plant nutrients in a trace amount. They're all in the parts per million or parts per billion amount. It's very small, but they're very essential for in the plant. It plays some of the important roles for the plant growth and development, some of them with the fruits development and seed development. It could compromise if they have some sort of deficiency. And then some of them react really much in the nitrogen fixation part, such as protein and nitrogen synthesis. They have a huge range of functions, produce enzyme, hormones, and substance they need for the normal plants to grow. So zinc and manganese are essential for nitrogen transformations in the plant, and borons are involved in the cell divisions. And I'm sure Greg will going to talk about all these nutrients later. So for borons, the soil contains about 0.5 to 2 parts per million. And they only uptake in the boric acid. So it's a form of chemistry that requires the plants to uptake into the plants. And the borons are mobile in the soil and is immobile in the plant. For the manganese side, it ranges from 20 to 300 milligrams per kilograms of dry matter. So that it helps with the manganese and some biochemical functions in the plants, and is slightly mobile in the soil, but not mobile in the plant. And for the zinc, is a translocation from the roots to the shoots in the forms of zinc 2+. So there are various researchers have concluded that zinc is one that is permeable mobiles in the plants, but they're actually not mobiles in the plant and soil. So I'm going to talk about some in the boron site. So boron is involved in the respiration synthesis of protein, like I said, transport of the sugars and some RNA, carbohydrates, and the plant's hormones. It plays a very important role in the cell wall, the plant's cell wall. And it's also play important to bring chlorine and phosphorus into the plants. And the productions and flowers, growth, pollen tuber, germination, develop on the fruits and the plant site that requires boron. It's very busy slides. For the manganese, it involved with a lot of enzymes that needed in the plants, and it plays a very unique role for the water splitting and transferring all the waters and oxygens in the photosynthesis levels. It also links to the nitrogen assimilation, so forms of nitrogens in the plants, and the presence of this is all just biochemistry, the site. Basically, boron, zinc, and manganese are very important for bringing those nutrients into the plants that is needed. The last one is zinc. It requires for the metabolism of the plants, that for also the enzyme. I didn't specify all these enzymes. It will, if you don't have zinc, it will stop with some of the plant growth and the plant's development. So zinc is very important for the protein synthesis. There are more than 300 enzymes that contain zinc as the components. So now I'm going to talk about the field experiment. In this trials, I only did a grower standard with no pro-coat, and then the other with a pro-coat with 3 pounds of boron, 8 pounds of zinc, and 8 pounds of manganese. And I replicated 4 times in the field. So we took some yield measurements, such as the size, different size profiles, average tubers counts, and all the defects, hollow heart, sunburn, in some payload sample. This is just a screenshot of what I did. We planted we used Brussels Burbank as our variety. We planted it on May 19th, and we had the row closure around July 12th. And everything across all the treatments are, we put in Yara, we put in insecticide, we put in KTS and borons, and we first killed in September 12th. Harvest in, well, it's out of my screen, but harvest in late September. I want to say September 28th. And, oh yeah, September 28th, right here. The harvest date is September 28th, so the total growing of the season is 1,116 days. And these are the product is playing across them. So the only difference between these 2 treatments are one with pro-coat, one without the pro-coat. Fungicides and insecticides are applied across. So this is my initial soil data. If you look at it, the soil pH is 6.4, and we have efficiency of boron, manganese, and zinc in the soil. The CEC is about 7.1, and the organic matter in that field is 3.2. So let's look at the yield. For the pro-coat treatment, there is no statistic difference between pro-coat and non-pro-coat. There's no difference in the tuber count or the average size of the tuber, but there are a percentage of underseeds. As you can see, the standards has more undersize than the pro-coat, percentage-wise. But for count, it was not statistically different. For the defects, pro-coats will have less defects than the standard. The total defect was almost 26 hundredweight per acres, and the standard was about 60 hundredweight. Percentage-wise, it's almost 19% of the yield of each plot, compared to Procoat is only 7% of the defects. Hollow heart was significantly different as well. You'll get about 39 hundredweights if you use just standard without a Procoat, but with Procoat, it's only 11 hundredweight per acres. So it only holds about 3% of the total yield. And the rest of them are not significantly different. The last one is US2 and US1s. There are no difference in size in yield. However, for US1, it was significantly different by percentage. 58% of the Procoats are US1 grade, and only 46% are using the standards. And the largest difference is the total payable. As you can see, 89% of the potatoes are payable if you're using Procoat, and for the standards, it's only 76%. The last one is the specific gravity. There are a huge difference between 78 to 81. Those are about, I can be 90% confident saying these data are, these treatment and non-treatments are different. Any question? Oh, okay, yes.
So on the standard, you use no boron at all?
No, no, that is boron for foliar. If you look,
Right,
yeah.
but not in the...
Not Procoat, correct. Oops. Yep, here. So the boron application is there.
No, but so go back to where you showed on the planting, what you used.
Oh, the agronomy is right. Yeah, this one?
Oh, that's all right.
We're recording this, come on.
No, I don't want to. You might get that.
Right.
So on the standard, you use no boron in the ground, like in the fertilizer.
Correct. Correct. There's no Procoat on it.
So on the Procoat one, how many pounds per acre would that kind of figure to?
3. Boron is 3. And then zinc is 8.
Boron's 3. Okay.
And then manganese is 8 pounds.
3 pounds. So on the yield, well, see, like really 3 pounds is good, but kind of if you would do this test again, really on the check you should probably have used some, like because everybody would have used some. You know what I mean? Like it might not have been Procoat, but it would have been like a granular, boron. So really, technically, I'm using that technically. But anyway, like really to show that Procoat really does good, it would have been better to have, well, that or would have been better to have 3 pounds of boron the other way.
So we've done that a lot, right?
Oh yeah, no, I know, but I'm just saying, like I like Procoat. I mean, Nick will say that, and I'm telling you, like that's the best stuff there is. But like really on a test, it would have been probably better to show because everybody would have used boron, you know. But
not everybody puts boron.
Well, if they don't, they got a lot of hollow heart. Then.
Well, that's the thing.
But we did that one year. We didn't do that. One year we didn't put boron, just for some ungodly reason, and it was awful. So, but anyway, and then where you show the yield difference, that is not bad. I mean, you say there's no yield difference, but you have 1,600 hundredweight difference, right?
I know. Farmer always said that, like, but in the science world.
Well, but in this room,
correct.
I think we would agree,
I agree
that 16 is pretty good. So if you times that by even 12 bucks, you know, 100. I mean, really, that's nothing. That's a couple $100 almost.
That's
So to use Procoat is probably only what? How much per ton, Danny? $30, $40 more a ton?
I would say no. The 388 is about 75.
$75 a ton more.
Yes.
So if you had that on a ton and you were using like 1,300 pounds or something, so you wouldn't, you know, that would be a good that would be a good yield. You know, that would be really on what.
So basically, be 2/3 of that cost. But you're right, and that's where statistics separate
that's
from.
Just on the yield. That's
Yeah.
not counting the quality too. You know,
Correct.
so I mean, I agree with everything what you're saying. I'm actually showing.
No,
that
I
it
appreciate
is
that.
even better. Like, I mean, really.
So what you're saying is I should just test this with boron too?
Well, I think if you were going to make a standard, the standard really mostly from everybody would be some boron. you know, and really actually, until we started using, like Danny's the one that really started pushing us on using, and Greg too, but using that much in the fertilizer. Like Seth Williams, the first time I talked to Seth about getting some fertilizer, I told him I wanted to use 3 pounds per acre of boron. He almost fell over. He said, "What?" I said, "Nope, I want to put 3 pounds per acre. I don't care." Well, he drove by that field every day in the summer thinking that it was going to be dead, you know, so, but anyway, but, yeah.
I'm gonna back up, Brian, just a whisker on this.
Oh, geez.
Boron compared, you take foliar, you did that at row closure. Most people that are doing boron are doing it in furrow. This is not a great comparison, in my opinion. Because boron's that is a big deal. If that's not, you take boron applied that late. We never apply boron that late in our programs, but each to his own. But this is not comparative, in my opinion.
So you're saying these tools are not comparable?
You're putting boron at different timings. Am I right? Am I done miss something here?
Well, I mean, you could probably...
they're doing boron at row closure.
Yeah.
When's the pro coat getting boron put on?
Well, that's in...
That's in
So you guys
That's
are
happening.
using...
That's happening right then.
Yeah, they're putting it right on the granger. But you know, like, see, another thing...
So you're taking pro coat with boron, right?
Right.
Infused on it at planting versus your trial where you're putting boron at row closure.
Well, they're doing both.
Yeah.
Everything was the same except for the program.
Correct.
So every plot had the foliar boron, but one plot just had the pro coat and
Ahead of time.
ahead of time.
Yeah.
But they all had the foliar boron program.
And the problem with this is, that was the first spray, fungicide spray. That's why the boron, because I had recommended it before that was the first fungicide spray they put on. That's why it was the 14th.
So both trials got boron at row closure.
Yeah, they all
So
got
this-
the same foliar program.
This
The only
program is for the whole field, with or without. This is the standard. That's everything we put it in. The only difference are Proco and no Proco. I think that's enough.
Yeah, my question was on the gravity. Your gravity, there was quite a difference on the standard, and the Proco was less. And is that because you think the plants were less mature, or?
I don't know. This is the maximum I can push is 116 days already.
How big of a plot was that, and how big of
So it's 4
how
rows.
many samples did you do for gravity?
4 kilograms, or whatever, 8 pounds maybe. Yeah. That is a standardized protocol. We have a machine to do. We call it a hydrometer. Yeah, you put in all the potatoes and then you just put it under water. Everything is measured exactly the same.
There was 4 of each, in other words. There was 4 of these, and they were tested with other products too, but these are the ones that we're interested in. There was 4 of the grower standard and 4 with the Proco.
I replicated it 4 times, randomly in the field. And then I collect so that there's no bias in this data. I label them. I did it myself. So that's why replication matters, right? You could have did it one time and then the data was skewed on one side. This is the average number across 4.
What's the analysis on pro coat again?
388. 3 pounds of 3 pounds of boron, 8 pounds of zinc, and 8 pounds of manganese. That's the code we have.
I can change that. That can be changed however you want it. Absolutely.
Yeah, they spray that right on the ground.
This is going to be the standard that we're going to. We started off at a 366. We bumped it up.
But if you use the Aspire with it, you end up with more boron.
The Aspire in your blend can give you another pound to pound and a half of boron per acre, evenly distributed. So like we played that video earlier that showed how the Aspire thing. It's impregnated into the.
But is this the cheapest
row.
way to get those 3 elements? Because we're doing the same. We're doing the boron at row closure, not row closure. We're doing it at planting. the manganese is the only, we're doing that in our blend. Is this the cheapest way to do this?
Well, the thing is, if you're using granular fertilizer, and we don't, I don't care what it costs.
We're not,
because it works so
the only
good.
thing we're
that
doing
it doesn't
granular
matter.
is the manganese.
I won't buy the fertilizer unless it doesn't have it on it.
It's comparative.
This product is coated on every grill that you have going on.
We're going to do liquid on the seed feed.
Oh, you're still okay. So that's even.
The only thing we're not stripping it properly, or in a big way, is the manganese.
So this is the only thing is difference with standard. The rest of them, everything treated the same, planting the same. My seed piece was coated with Cruiser Max already. So everything is started as the exact same thing. The only difference was the product of Proco. Even the rate is exactly the same. Any other question? I'm glad, yes.
B, when you say everything's exactly the same, was your rotation before the crop the same?
Yep.
It was, okay.
Yeah. So my plot is only 4 row, 20 foot long. I harvest the middle 2 row in 10 foot long. So 2 rows, total 20. That's as many protection as as many barrier as I can get already. And I replicate the same plot 4 times. With the same, anything that claims as standard is the same, and anything that claims as a Proco just have the Proco. And all the fungicide, insecticides, and all these products are sprayed exactly throughout the whole field. Whether they're standard or not, they all get this. Mactars, hydrophos, boron, KTS. The only difference between is Proco and non-Proco. Question?
I would maybe just say one thing real quick. To address what Brent said earlier, I used to work in retail, and when we started dealing with Emerson, before I was with Yara on Proco, we sort of wanted to try to convince ourselves that Proco was the way to go. So we did this trial multiple times with granular boron, and saw very similar results to what you're seeing here. And honestly, in all fairness to granular boron, due to distribution issues, it's not even, so we could have been doing samples in areas that didn't even have boron in them, right? So that was sort of why we ended up starting with Proco, because we kept seeing these consistent results, even with like a borate in the furrow. So it's just better distribution, better uptake.
If you think of it this way, you got 1 pound of borate, it's like 13 pounds of fertilizer per acre, and if you're putting on 1,300 pounds, just imagine that. It's all in the distribution, in other words. Even if you have 2 pounds, I mean, you're talking 26 pounds, so on and so forth. So it's a very small percentage of the whole blend. And that's why it's on everything, because it's all in the ejection chamber, all on your fertilizer at the same time. It has an electrical charge, so it bonds to the fertilizer, in other words. It doesn't fall off, because it's an oil rather than water. So I guess that's the secret to its job.
Sorry, my bag was on this side. Is anyone raised their hand? I'm sorry. No? Any questions? I'm glad. Like, if I'm not clear, please point it out. I understand this matter, but I'm gonna let you do the interpretation. But in the science world, we call that no difference. So that's the specific gravity. It's 81 versus 78. And I have no explanation on that. We all measure it all at the same time. All these parameters, we record it all at the same time.
Personally, I think it is a maturity issue, because the other ones, Sinus earlier, because they are standard, because the micronutrients are keeping the other plants a little greener. So I think all things together, it just gave the edge. Normally, I would think it would be otherwise, but it was such a screwed up year, so it's kind of hard to draw conclusions, because we did a bunch of other trials, and it was just the other way around. So it just depends on the location, the field, rotations, and so on.
So this is a 3-year rotation trial. So we have a potato, and then oats, and then underseed with ryegrass. It's actually Timothy grass. That is the rotation at the Rustic Research Farm. Yes?
How are they storing?
How
are they storing?
This
Are they
is
good?
no, we don't do storage.
Oh, you don't
yeah, I don't
do
do
storage.
storage. Yeah, we have a few facilities, so we didn't do any storage. Like after we measure all this, we're done. Like the potato is gone.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm not able to, and I don't know what the standard protocol. We are learning. All the scientists are learning. At the farm, nobody really do storage at all. So we're learning this. So I can say when we measure this, there's no soft rock. I don't know what that comes into play, and I would not know. This is done by November.
What we did is all our trials were inspected by a retired USDA inspector, Peter Jondro. So everything we did, he inspected.
Well, I thought they had bill storage built for over there for.
Yeah, but that's their trials.
That's
Somebody,
somebody else's deal.
they harvested the actual potatoes and gave to us, and then we had the inspector.
Okay.
Question. So yeah, storability, I'm not able to tell you. We don't store these. As soon as we measure a specific gravity, is done. This is some of the data for, I get it from the weather station we had in Presque, right at the Rustic Research Farm. And then this is the long-term data you get it from the, NOAA. And you can see, like, statistically it's not that much different, but you can see the distribution didn't come at the same time. Like some of the months it was much more water than the other. We do not have more water this year. It just come in the wrong timing as a total. Question? Thank you. My name is Bee. And then thanks for listening. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Bee, very much. I'd really like to commend you for your efforts here. It's not easy for someone not from this area to come here and make an impact in the community. And, instead of coming here and trying to push your experience on us, you worked to learn our culture and our practices, and you've gotten to know the growers. And then you use your experience to help build up our foundation. So we thank you very much, and we hope that you stay here for the long haul and continue to work with us. And please, another round of applause for being here.
Thanks for spending the time with me. Thank you.
I'm going to be a little bit annoying with the microphone. The center tables are being picked up by the microphone and the camera, but the outside tables are not. And we're recording this because there's quite a few growers that couldn't make it tonight and really want to pick up on this information, and they would like to be involved or like to hear all the questions and hear the answers. So if you're on the outside tables and you have a question, please raise your hand and I'll get there with the mic so that we can get good audio for this recording. Excuse me. Up next we have our big hitter for the event this evening. Greg Patterson. He's the CEO, president, co-founder, and chief agronomist of A&O Labs in Ontario, Canada. He has over 35 years of experience in agriculture and consulting, and he's worked all over North America. He's going to be addressing, the big issues that we had this summer in our season. And so please pay close attention. And just like in Bee's presentation, if you have a question while he's speaking, raise your hand and interrupt him, because he loves taking questions on the fly. And without further ado, please welcome Greg Patterson. Take a second to get set up here.
Everybody hear me okay?
Oh, you're muted.
Muted? Everybody hear me okay? talk loud, so we might want to turn it down a bit. As Nick said, if you have questions to this presentation, by all means, just try to answer them. I've got a bunch of slides that Danny told me to kind of put some information together to answer questions. We may get through them all or not, I don't know. And I got to apologize up front. They're a mess, because Danny messed up my presentation yesterday, made me shift it all around. But we'll be okay. We all have a big meal. If you get tired of listening, get up and walk around, stand up. That don't bother me. If you fall asleep, that's okay, just don't snore too loud. I had an experience one time after I spoke after somebody ate, and a guy fell asleep, and he started snoring a little bit, and I said to his buddy next to him, I says, can you just jab him and wake him up? He says, you put him to sleep, you wake him up. So I won't wake you up, so just don't snore too loud.
How do I put this on full display?
It's in the corner.
Which corner?
Sorry, right corner. Right here. This one right here. This one.
Ah, okay.
Yay.
All right. Forward, back, and the center's your pointer.
Okay.
Is that volume okay for everybody? Can you turn it up, down? Good? Okay.
So what we're going to talk about is just understanding your soil, understanding what happened. We're going to talk about some experience we've had in the past, and I'm just going to try to address the things we can do in the field to circumvent some of the things that went on last year, some understanding of how we can be proactive of fixing some of the issues in the field, no matter what the problem is. So there's things we can do. First place we started, we have to understand what our soil is telling us and what's there. So we want to analyze our dirt and get a really good understanding of what's in the soil and how we can work with it. Our soil test looks like this. I don't know how many people have looked at this. There's a lot of information on here. Some of the information down here is work we've done on aluminum saturation that has an impact on root growth. K-to-magnesium ratio is some work we've done on understanding relationships. We'll talk more about that. P saturation. And a lot of these ranges are things that we put together through our research. A&L Canada started back in 1984. A group of farmers from New Brunswick moved to Ontario, and they were potato growers. And they were tired of waiting for research information out for production issues. So they started A&L labs at that time called crop tech laboratories to work on nothing but production issues in field on all kinds of crops. So everything we've done over the 35 plus years has been in-field research on production issues, working with grower groups like this to resolve issues with no preconceived ideas on why we're going to do the plot, just trying to answer questions. So that's the soil report. Let's not focus on the recommendations. I want to teach everybody how to read this information and how to use this information to make a good recommendation and address some of the production issues we have in the field. So we'll focus a lot on how to use this information to make logical decisions in the season. So when we take a soil sample, you do a site-specific sampling, we're trying to develop a nutritional map of the field. So you really can understand the variability, and you're using site-specific sampling. So you can get back to that point year after year and make some sense out of it. Getting rid of some of the guesswork. Crop planting. And this is important. You need to know that the crop of potatoes you're growing may not work well in certain soil conditions or certain fertility, because you just won't get the quality you're looking for, and chances are the storability will be terrible. So when I make recommendations, and the hardest recommendation I ever made is told a grower not to put potatoes in that field. And you need to understand those limitations, because it can really bite you in the end. When we do a soil sample, we do our mapping system, how we kind of outline and paint the picture for you. We're trying to identify hidden hungers. And once you identify what these hidden hungers are, then you can put together a program that can help you address them before they cause a problem. So you put together tissue programs, you put together foliar feed programs, side dressing programs, to just kind of address these things before they become a problem. So that's kind of the approach we're taking, as a very proactive approach to the production system that you're trying to work with. When we do our soil mapping, we have a bunch of very intuitive maps that we put together with algorithms. This is a map of soil type. This is a map of parts per million. I don't know how many people in here have looked at our site-specific maps, our mapping system. But then we got percent saturation of potassium. And you can see we're painting the picture in a number of different ways to help you identify the problems. In our mapping system, green is the optimum level for that nutrient. Anything outside that is less than ideal. And you can see in the part per million map is quite a bit different than the percent saturation or predictable availability of that nutrient. But these are still very two-dimensional. So we take another mapping system and we index it, incorporating the soil type in that, so that we got what is the optimum range for potassium availability in that particular soil type. So we're trying to paint the picture so you can see what that field looks like from the tractor seat for that particular nutrient. And that's kind of the approach we take, trying to paint the picture in as many different ways as we can. We have a new program called Parasite, which is a platform we load all this information into. We use satellite imaging or drone imaging to look at the biomass, so that we can take all these maps and start making some sense out of them. And then we have a whole pile of algorithms in that system that, again, helps you interpret the information. The only reason I'm going through this real quickly is to show you that we've got a bunch of tools we can use to gather the information and make some decisions in field. So, potassium is a problem in many seasons. This is supposed to be later in the slide, but Danny says lead with this because that, I think, is a problem. When you look at this crop is a heavy consumer of potassium. It sets up yield early in the field, and potassium is what drives that. So we need to get good levels of potassium in the early petiole samples, or we run into yield and production and quality problems, which you saw this year. So we need potassium early. When you look at any crop, for every pound of nitrogen a crop takes up, it needs 3 pounds of potassium. Now when we put nitrogen on a field, about 50 to 75% of the nitrogen we apply in a given year actually gets into the crop that year. Only 15% of the potassium we apply in a given year gets to the crop that year. So we're relying on the soil to make up the difference. Mid-season is 1-to-1. But this is demonstrating how important potassium is for the first period of growth of any crop. Determines your yield, determines the quality. It helps the plant use sunshine. The photosynthetic capability of the plant is very much determined by the potassium content in those leaves. So there's a whole bunch of things going on in the season really around potassium. We need to understand what these optimum ranges are early, and we need to address them. In our tissue program, and I'll show you some examples a little later, we know we need 12 to 13% potassium in the early stages of growth. If you're not there, you need to do something about it. In certain seasons, cold, wet springs, no matter how much potassium you've put on, and no matter how good your soils are, this plant can't get potassium. It's just not available. And if you have overcast conditions, potassium relies on sunshine. They work together. So, overcast conditions, less available potassium. So if you see your tissue sample come back, and let's say it's early stages of growth, and you're supposed to be in that 12 to 13% range, and you're at 10, you need to do something about it right now. Because if you don't fix that potassium load, and it goes further in growth stage, you'll never catch up. The damage is done. So when we look at early season tissue samples, that early season potassium in the tissue is very, very important because it's yield and some quality issues we'll talk about that everybody saw this year. So we have tools to look at this. When you try to fix this, you could probably fix this maybe with some K-Mag application, but your best approach to fixing this is to going in with a foliar potassium carbonate, and I say potassium carbonate because it is the most efficient way of getting potassium into the plant foliar. It has a very, anyhow, we won't go there because it's chemistry, but it's the most efficient source. So you want to get out there and you want to put it on early to bring that potassium level up. Now because a foliar application is something like potassium, you're expecting to move the parts per million a huge jump to take it from 10% to 12%, which you might not accomplish. But if we can stop the drop of the potassium so that when you go in the next stage of growth, you're now back within the range, you've accomplished that. Okay, you with me on this? So you got to get there right away because you can't get to it later. And it's not just potatoes I do this on. I do this on all crops we grow because that potassium load is really important for quality in these crops. If potassium starts out low recidivus and not addressed, prior to flowering, yield is compromised. Yield and quality. If we're talking about quality in this particular application. So these are the ranges, and these ranges are based on our own in-field research. In the early season, I want my potassium up in this range, 10 to 13%, and closer to 13 is better. Next stage of growth will be 8 to 10, 11%, and then I want to be at bulking time, I want to be probably about 6%. The range is 3.5 to 9. If you're at 3.5 at bulking stage, you're likely not getting the yields that you would expect. So we really want to get things in place, and if we don't start out with high potassium levels, we won't be at 6% at bulking time. Okay? This plant takes up a lot of potassium.
Hey, Greg, this is the petioles that we're taking in your fields. What he's talking about this right now is the petioles, and you get your reading with Bill every week. Technically, he's talking about the first petiole that comes in needs to be at 12 to 9.
Yeah, I'm closer to 12 to 13, but yeah.
Okay, but last year, Bill, can you take it from here, please?
Last year we started low and we never caught up. You know, that's basically not really understanding this because we'd never seen this before. In the 20 years that we've done, you know, tissue tests, we've never started the season like this. We've always been, no matter what, and we always seem to rebound. But last year was very frustrating. It didn't happen, so it's like trying to figure this out.
Would the low potassium be due to the lack of sunlight that we had in our growing season this year?
Okay, you're one step ahead of me.
Because
I've seen this before.
Because it felt like
it
felt like the Kid Rock song. I hadn't seen the sunshine in 3 days.
Absolutely, absolutely. So sunshine. So we need sunshine to get photosynthesis to work properly in a plant. And if we have low potassium, we need more sunshine. If we have lots of potassium and low sunshine, we get better photosynthetic capability. If we have lots of sunshine, we can get away with lower potassium. So sunshine plays a major role. But there's one factor here that I've seen year over year, and it's Mother Nature screwing with us. You had a pretty good planting time. Things got in pretty decent, but then it turned cold and wet. When it's cold and wet, and overcast too, potash doesn't get taken up by the plant. So you have inefficiency of potash uptake, no matter what you're doing. So mental note here, if I get another season like this, I got the crop in, things went pretty good, but now I got no sunshine, or it's cold and wet, I better start watching my potassium load, because I need that potash early. And start looking at amendments like potassium carbonate. I'll show you how this works. I've been through a number of seasons like this. The first time I dealt with it was probably back in the late 80s, where we had the same type of season. It was in the Maritimes that we dealt with this. And we didn't have the potassium sources you have today readily available. We didn't have potassium carbonate, and I go after that one because I know the chemistry and how it works. Let me just review that. It has a very low point of deliquescence, which means it goes into solution on the leaf surface at very low humidity. It re-wets, and it has very little phytotoxicity. So it's a very efficient form of potassium for foliar uptake. So that's why that one particularly. So we didn't have that. So I was working with a consultant on the island when we identified this condition happening because we had low petiole levels, and we knew we had to do something about it. So we found potassium carbonate out of Germany. We brought it in the island in 45-gallon drums, and we applied it to some field plots. I'll show you what the response was. And it worked. So I talked to my friendly foliar fertilizer people and said, "You've got to put this in our jar." And they said, no, it's just a generic product. Anybody has it. Says, "Yeah, but we don't have it, and I needed it, and it wasn't available." So finally I convinced Fosen back at the time, which is now Yara, to put it in a jug. So now we get a bag of potash. Okay? So that's kind of the history of how that whole thing evolved. But it was because of the physiology we understood, and because of the chemistry we knew that it would work. Okay? So we have that resource now available. So we want to pay attention to these ranges because they affect us. Like I say, if you don't start here and you're here, you'll never get to here at this time.
Okay.
Yeah.
What if you broadcast in the springtime, and that potassium is supposed to take a little longer to break down? Why, if you're not seeing it that early, would you expect to see it later, mid-season?
Doesn't matter. You'll never get. You might get later in the season. You might get back into these ranges, but the damage is done. And at walking time, you won't be at 6. You'll be at 3. You'll never make up. Okay. And I'm talking about soils we've worked with for a long time. I've seen it happen before. Base saturation's high. We put on 300 or 400 pounds of K in season, either down the tube at hilling time, because my programs are a little K negative hilling time, a combination of potash in the planter, broadcast up front, depending on what you need. So there's no lack of potassium in the soil, okay? But the plant wasn't getting it because it was cold and wet and overcast.
Doesn't matter if you spread it fall time or broadcast in the springtime, there's no correlation of weather pattern?
No. So if you have low potassium levels, putting some potash in the fall allows it to work in the equilibrium of the soil and it becomes more available in the spring for you. If you have low potassium levels and you want to get better efficiency of your potassium uptake in the spring, go to sulfate of potash as opposed to a muriate of potash closer to plant because it's more plant available. And the build soil is the same, but it's more plant available. So there's all kinds of layers around that. But this particular condition you had with hollow heart is nothing you could have done by broadcast applications or nothing about building your soils. It all has to do with a cold, wet spring and potassium just not being taken up by the plant. Okay? So let's look at the whole way potash is taken up by plants. Potash is taken up by plants by marrying itself to nitrates at the root surface, moves up the xylem, up into the plant, up in the plant. The nitrates break off to produce the proteins, carbohydrates, amino acids, all the good stuff. Potassium picks up the sucrose, loads it in the phloem, translocates it down to the tuber, to the grain or whatever it is, the root system. A lot of the potassium, before we have a tuber or anything, is going into feeding the rhizosphere and the microbes in the rhizosphere, the exudates that the plant produces. So that's the system. If I have low potassium levels and I can't move that sucrose away from the leaf, the warehouse, nitrates accumulate. Something else we'll talk about a little bit later when we talk about nitrates accumulating and just how you can read the tissue sample and pick up on this as well. But keep that in mind as we go forward in understanding this whole piece. So this is that whole mechanism. So in season, when I have low potassium levels, this is a soil sample from a field of a consultant that I worked with. These are pikes, a new variety for this grower, and first time in this field. And she took a tissue sample early, and she's seeing nitrates start to spike. And she knows, because she's worked with us long enough, knowing that that's not ideal. I'm getting poor carb, again, you can't get carbohydrate production with high nitrates. So she knows she's not producing potatoes. So she's saying to me, Greg, what am I supposed to do here? I didn't change my nitrogen program. Should I be backing off of nitrogen with this variety? I said, no, Kate, look at your potassium and boron. And this is another one to keep in mind. We'll talk a little bit about boron and hollow heart. Boron does not cause hollow heart. Nobody saying about that? You're told it did. Boron, because it maintains the phloem structure for translocation, has a lot to do with that whole translocation of sucrose. But boron plays a major role in any plant that uses a lot of potassium. It stops the efflux of potassium from the plant. I cannot get 13% boron in that plant tissue, or potassium in that plant tissue, if I don't have good boron levels. So they play together. That's why you do see hollow heart with boron deficiency, because I'm not maintaining the potassium levels in the plant. So they work together. And they also have a lot to do with that whole phloem mechanism we talked about. So things we have to consider. So, oops, what happened to that? Yeah. So this is excessive nitrogen throughout the season with low boron. So we see high nitrogen levels, and look where our boron was. I mean, in potato production, you want to have north of 30 part per million in boron in your petioles. 25 or less is a deficiency. Now, in Maritimes, we're struggling with that, but it means we have to address it. We know your best potato production is 30 plus, and I like to see it about 40 or more. Okay, so just things to think about. This is another situation with yield and performance. There's your potassium level here versus this one. Oops. Anyhow, so just to bring that home a little bit, we're talking about sunshine. and potassium. Here's a field that's been well fertilized with potassium. We're looking at potassium levels in the top of the plant down to the 11th set of leaves down in well fertilized versus K fertilized or K stress. So you can see that progression. You can see the potassium content in the well fertilized versus the K stressed. But what we want to focus on here is look at the photosynthetic process or capability in that leaf tissue down through that canopy. So we're seeing a lot more efficient photosynthesis taking place in the higher potassium plant. Low sunshine, high sunshine. So again, potassium has a big impact on how this thing produces photosynthesis. So we look at photosynthesis required for adequate potassium leaf tissue in corn. We need 3 to 5% in early growth at 6 to 12 stage if we want to be 1 to 2% early season. If we're not there, photosynthetic process stops or shuts down very fast. And again, here I'm looking at the respiration process, and it's a little bit dry, but I'm getting to a point here. This is low potassium levels, better potassium levels, high potassium levels. This is the CO2 photosynthetic respiration process that's taking place here. This is what's being consumed in photorespiration and dark respiration with this leaf, and this leaf system here. You can see in the low potassium, we're consuming more energy in dark respiration than the photorespiration. This is a very inefficient use of energy, but it's what the plant goes to when it's potassium starved. When we look at this photosynthetic energy produced, the difference between adding these together and this is what you're taking home in crops. This plant's going to die. This plant's going to do better. This one's going to do really well. And we have a much more efficient energy consumption in that system. So the point I'm trying to drive here is in a cold, wet spring, overcast conditions, it has a big impact on how this plant actually produces the energy and the photosynthesis capabilities. You with me on that? It's a little bit of dry, but I'm trying to break it down to make it understandable. That's just the same thing. So, getting back to our potassium trials, and this goes back to the late 80s when we brought the potassium carbonate in. And we saw the low tissue levels, and then the consultant that I was working with, we went out in the field and we started cutting little tubers open, like this. And we found brown center. And, you know, some significant brown center that you wouldn't expect in a small tuber at that stage. So we got potassium carbonate, and we put on 2 liters, 7 days apart of potassium on one side, and this is the check side. There's the treated side, there's the check. Now that year on the island, we had anywhere from 50 to 80% hollow heart. So we've done this a number of times. We have the same conditions. We picked that up. It solves hollow heart. Now, you've got to get there early. You've got to use potassium carbonate. You've got to make sure your boron's in check. And you can do, you won't cure it 100%, but you'll do a significant job at resolving a lot of the issue. Yes?
My question is actually for Danny and Bill. What product do you have that's potassium that would be safe for the early season?
Agri-potash from Yarra.
For foliar?
For foliar.
Okay.
It's a potassium carbonate.
Now, the only problem with potassium carbonate, I put up there right now, not to protect Yarra, but they didn't want to put it in the pail to start with. But potassium carbonate does not mix well with stuff. So you don't want to start mixing a whole bunch of stuff or you're going to have a spherical applesauce, just so you know, okay? I don't want you to say, well, you told me it was okay to do.
There's one thing that you have to be careful with agri-potash is with omega. It will stress the plant. I don't know why, but it does.
Why? Because potassium carbonate drives things into the plant, into the leaf, aggressively.
I didn't know why, but you said it.
So we'll talk a little bit about potassium yield on potato. We see substantial yield increase by keeping your potassium levels high. Again, this plant needs a lot of potassium. You need 4 to 6 pounds of potash per day during bulking. A lot of the soils that you have in Maine or in PEI or in New Brunswick don't have the ability to diffuse that much potassium to the plant. So we're always working with a deficit when this plant's under heavy crop load. That's why we put so much potassium on. That's why we put some on healing. That's why we're always chasing potassium in this crop. It's a huge consumer. The boron helps the plant use the potassium properly and stops the efflux of potassium. Does that make sense? I mean, even with 4 and 5% saturation of potassium in your soils, it's still, they struggle. That's why we kind of over apply potassium in potato fields. So we look at boron for a minute. And again, I apologize, these slides are a little bit twisted because we did some of this yesterday. When we look at boron and potassium are synergistic and antagonistic. The more potassium I put in my field, the harder it is for the plant to take up boron. Okay? So the higher your potassium levels, the more difficulty the plant has to find the boron in the field. So again, you're going to start looking at more applications, foliar, and other ways of putting boron on. A lot of people think that boron is affected by calcium and pH. This is somewhat right. But boron has an affinity to clay. The higher the clay content in your field, the higher your part per million of boron has to be in the field to get boron into the plant. So if I have a clay loam soil, I don't know what your CECs are around 6 or 7 here, or are they higher than that? Bill?
Pardon?
What your CECs around here, are they higher than 6 or 7, or where you at?
9 to 11 on average.
9 to 11. There, 1 to 1.5 ppm is probably where you're going to have to be, and you'll have boron availability. But in those soils, it's going to be hard to build that. If I had an 18 to 20 CEC, my ideal part per million would be 2 to 2.5, which most people think is too high. But that's what we need, because it's bound to the clay. So just put that out there so you understand the dynamics. But again, to keep potassium into the plant, I need to have more boron there to stop the potassium from leaving the plant. Okay? So they're synergistic and antagonistic. Okay. Well, let's just talk about what I just said in different soil types. So we look at what boron does in foliar applications and just how it helps the plant use nutrients. This is a plant with adequate levels of boron. This is your phloem. See how nice and developed these phloem tubes are? This is boron deficiency. So anytime your boron levels in your plant tissue drop below 25, and I show you it happens right at 30. I got some slides that demonstrate 27 ppm, and you can actually see the boron deficiencies. That's the conduit by which the plant moves all the photosynthase down to the tuber. And if that is disrupted, you're not getting proper translocation. You're not getting proper potassium load down to the tuber. When the potassium and carbohydrates get down there, they're high in reducing sugars. What happens when you have high reducing sugars in a potato tuber?
Poor color.
Poor color, lower specific gravity, all that stuff. Okay? So I want to make sure when I look at tissue samples all through the growing season, I'm maintaining a boron level, because it not only helps with my potassium use and maintaining efflux, all the sucrose that's moving around the plant has to go down that phloem, and that's the conduit. Okay? So I'm just trying to pull the physiology together with some things that we can look at and things that we can actually manage or measure in the field to give me an idea of just what's going on in that field. So anytime your phloem looks like this, you're losing yield. It might not turn into quality issues, but every time your phloem looks like this, you're losing yield. Okay? This is just a tech bulletin on boron and how in boron deficiency situations, you know, we get a lot of things happening in the plant that just is dysfunctional that I just showed you. So boron deficient tissue cambial cells cease to divide, but cell elongation continues, and that will give you the stretched out look of those cells. We use boron late season to finish crop off. And what we're doing there, again, this is a field that's been, this is an experiment by accident. This was boron sprayed on a field to help it senesce. It was put on with the late season fungicide. The plane missed this side. Look how green that is compared to this. This is just a few days later. So when a field goes rank green, and you think it's over use of nitrates, which is what I showed you. But we get nitrate accumulation in the plant because we're not moving sucrose away from the leaf. It's accumulating in the leaf. Going in with a little boron helps that phloem get put back together and starts moving sugars down to the tuber, and we get good senescence. So if you have a field that's rank green on you, right away, farmers think too much nitrogen, and it is nitrate accumulation in the tissue. And it's not because of your nitrogen management. It's likely because your boron was light and you've got dysfunctional phloem tubes. So going in and put a quarter pound on helps it senesce, probably drives the sugars to the base. But another thing too is that helps the plant mature properly. So that if you had to regulate that or top kill that, you can go lighter on your top kill, so you're not causing an issue. Boron closes the door on the stem. So it is responsible for making that apical scar when that stem drops off the potato, and close the door so you don't get bacterial infection in storage. Your yellow flesh needs more boron than your white flesh, and that's part of the reason why. Okay? I'm jumping all over the place here, but I'm just trying to pull it all together so there's things we can see and things we know physiologically that cause an issue in potato production. Any questions on that? Okay. So again, here we are back looking at this tissue sample. Here's potassium levels early season, and really not as high as we'd like to see. We're okay here. We're only at 25 parts per million of boron. We put a little bit more boron on, and it jumps up. It maintains that. This is a dry spell comes by. We've dropped to 13 ppm. Look what happened to our potassium. Just bang. Put a little more boron back on. We jump it back up, trying to maintain that so we can finish that crop off properly. So you can see the response if you're timely enough to a boron application when you see the potassium levels dropping. Right? This is looking at the two again. That's potassium in a field that's doing really well. You can see how it's maintaining here. There's where our boron starts. Still not high enough. We're chasing this all the time with foliars to maintain it as high as we can. And you can see here we're cranking at the end here to keep it. And this is before ProCoat, by the way. This is before we're putting it in the bed. This is all done by foliars and broadcast up front. This is potassium level starting out the door low. You can see where our boron started. We're trying to catch up, but we just didn't get there. And the boron levels dropped off very quick. We lost that field. This is not our research. This is coming from independent research. But people are afraid of boron on all crops. How many people have heard in here that boron's toxic and can kill your crop? Yeah? Tell you a story. When I first started this business, we do a little bit of environmental testing, and I had one customer call me up and he said, I have to landfill all my alfalfa. And I'm growing alfalfa and feeding to the horse industry, and the Ministry of Environment has come to me and says I have to landfill it. I said, well, why? He said, well, you need a tissue sample. There's 500 parts per million of boron in the tissue. I said, what? He said, yeah. I said, what's the soil level like? What are you doing? He said, soil's over 500 as well. So I got an environmental problem. But what are you doing here? He says, well, we're a bioremediation site. We take in affluent from a boron processing plant, and we spray it in this crop to get rid of it. And we keep harvesting off to get rid of the boron. And I said, I have to see this. So I jumped in my car and went down, because I thought I'd see a dead crop. We get down to the nicest crop of alfalfa I've ever seen, 500 ppm. So boron's not as toxic as we think it is. This is research being done, and again, and this is showing that 60 to 90 ppm of boron gives us our best yield of potatoes, and there's no toxicity. So PBO levels at 60 ppm is actually our best level for adequate production in potato production. Now, you'll struggle to get there on sand soils. If you can keep it above 30, I'm really happy. If you can get it to 40, I'm happier. But this is just to show you, don't be afraid of boron application. But you don't want to put wax of it in granular form next to the root system. You want the distribution is important. It's the same stuff there. And just to kind of drive this home, this is a recent test plot given to me by Emerson and Sean, I believe. Treated, checked. Soil types are pretty similar. There's the change with one. This is the potassium level. Go back here. So you see where potassium and boron levels are, and you see where the potassium has dropped down here. This is the check. This is the yield difference between the treated and the check. We've got a difference of 122 hundredweight with quality. The boron had 3 additional pounds of actual boron put on foliar. I believe there was some put on a pro coat and a foliar on both prior to that, but the treated had additional 3 pounds put on foliar to give us that. So that additional 3 pounds works out to about $100 an acre. But when you look at 122 hundredweight, around $15 a hundredweight, I mean, that's a net of about $1,700 in the field from that application. So very worthwhile. And that was the difference. So there's your hollow heart differential and your quality differential if we just look at what the boron did. But I showed you the slides, the boron was helping with the potassium uptake that gave us that response. All right, so people who think that they're solving the hollow heart problem with boron, yes, you are, but it's because you're forcing the potassium in the plant. If you do both, you'll have much more success in a cold, wet spring with hollow heart.
Yes. Over the past 20 years, there's been a lot of improvement made by all the guys in the potato business that are now, I think, in pretty good shape on potassium. Regular feeding, it's going on lots of different ways, but the soil levels are good. They're getting a good amount of feeding. What is your recommendation on how to lay out a boron program for the season? When and how much, and how often?
When I first started working potatoes back in the mid-'80s with my original shareholders, all I had was Solubor. I didn't have other sources. And anybody in here worked with Solubor?
That was a great product, huh?
Well, you say so, but you,
that's a little bit of sarcasm.
you would be a farmer that I worked with, and the minute I walked off the farm, he quit using it because I hated putting it in the sprayer. You have all kinds of products today that, actually, nobody uses Solubor. So, as many ways as you can get it on, chase that boron in the patio. Get it up there. Okay? Even with the best potash program and good potash soils, in a cold, wet spring, you're going to run into trouble. So, agri-potash and boron, and just keep chasing it. Your patio test tells you what you need. If you're above 30 ppm, I'm happy. Like I say, in PEI, we chase it all the time. They're lucky if you get 25 to 30, but it's a problem. Right? So I just put that up there because Emerson and I argued forever that boron is the reason for hollow. I said, no, it's not. It's potassium, but boron helps with potassium uptake. So they work together. We have a lot of issues with people afraid of boron. And I deal with this right across Canada, well, across North America. And everybody's afraid of it. So I was out west, and we're trying to get boron into potatoes, and I'm trying to convince people to put more boron in the ground. And they say, well, we grow canola, we grow grain, and it's toxic. So we took soils from Manitoba back to London, and we put it in a greenhouse, and we started experimenting with boron in these soils. CECs in these soils is 18 to 25. They're at 0.8 part per million already. This is a trial in Manitoba. We found it responded to about 3 pounds of actual boron application. So there's boron at 1 pound per acre, already 0.8 in soil. There's 2 pounds. There's 3 pounds and 4 pounds. No difference yield-wise between 3 and 4 pounds, so 3 pounds is the way to go. But we weren't getting boron, there are no foliars here, it's all ground application. We were not getting any boron into those potato crops and getting us the yield the size of potato we wanted until we got to at least 3 pounds applied. All right? Any questions on that? Concerns? Yeah.
So on the foliar, I know like the last time I heard you speak, like we were using a pint like of boron each time because of the fact of everybody, oh Jesus, you know, you got to be careful with the boron. And you said, look, if you're not putting 1/4 of a pound, don't even bother.
That's right.
So if you are like low on your petioles, how high can you go per application? Like to where is it?
I have some growers that say, I used up to a pound. Well, you got away with it. I like to stay at 1/4 to 1/3 of a pound actual every time I apply, just to get away from having any idle, because I put on boron at half a pound and a full pound in some experiments, and I've had phytotoxicity. Not to the point where I've seen leaf damage, but we've lost yield. So I don't want to go there. You can put on as often as you want, but stay at a quarter to a third of a pound. Okay.
That'd be around a liter.
A liter of Bortrac is a third of a pound.
Yeah.
A quart, you mean?
No. Yeah, remember where you are. Remember where you are.
You use the password a couple hours
Yes.
So like, I know like a lot of this stuff that we use, like you could buy one for $5, you know, and the other one for 10. Like, so like just 10% boron is $8 a gallon, you know. So like, but then like say Bortrac is more or whatever. But like, is there a big difference in sources of boron to use?
Yes.
There is.
And again, I was talking to Danny a little bit earlier. When it comes to foliars, there's no magic. Anybody tells you they've got a foliar boron or foliar product that has a secret sauce in it and this is so great, it's bullshit. Okay?
That's what Danny told me.
Yeah. It's bullshit. There's no secret sauce. Okay? If you look at the label and understand the chemistry, it tells you right on the label how it's made. Something that is a sulfate base will be taken up the plant much faster, like Epsom salts or zinc sulfates, but they have a lot of phyto, so you can only use little bits, and you have to go back and keep spraying. Some of the foliars we have are chelated with citric acids, and they take the straights and put in the citric acid, a little bit of safener, and you can put a little more on, but still you're looking at something like a sulfate base, so you can't put a lot on. When you look at the label and it tells you the compounds it's made of, calcium chloride, Epsom salts, potassium chloride base or potassium phosphate base, there's a thing called point of deliquescence. And point of deliquescence is the humidity at which they go back into solution on the leaf surface or re-wet and can dissolve and be in solution on the leaf surface. The higher the Fick's law is, the higher the concentration of the nutrient on the leaf surface that stays suspended in solution for the longest period of time has your most efficacy. So it's right on the label if you understand the chemistry. So there's no magic. When you get working with certain chemical companies or certain suppliers that make these things, they put safeners in there. In some of the cases where they have, they're not using something like potassium chloride or something else, they might put something in there that improves its point of deliquescence. That's just some of the magic they do in some of the chemistry and formulation. So formulation makes a difference, but it all comes down to what was the chemistry it was made of. Okay? So if you like a product because it mixes well, and they're paying attention to the point of deliquescence, and they're making it with our products, they're good products. But the label should tell you what that is. Yeah.
How does pH affect that point of deliquescence?
pH really doesn't have an effect on that, but it does have an effect on how the leaf takes things up. When it comes to phosphorus, and I'll show you here in a few minutes, phosphorus needs hydrogen to help it translocate across any plant membrane. So there's a process called facilitated diffusion that helps the plant take it up at the root, and the same process happens on the leaf surface. So with phosphorus, I need hydrogen, or I need it a little bit acidic. So the more acidic a foliar phosphorus is, the more it penetrates and can get into the leaf. But we trade that off with a little bit of phytotoxicity. When you get into the micronutrients, the ideal pH for something like manganese is around 4 to 4.5 pH, and I get better translocation into the leaf. When it comes up to the zincs and other micronutrients, copper, someplace around 5 to 6 is probably more effective because less phyto, but it needs that slightly acidity to get it into the leaf.
But that's only on foliar applications.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Comes to boron, it's alkaline, so it's a higher pH, or potassiums. Okay. So there's no magic to the foliars. It's one, does a company know how to make them and the right products they're selecting to put into the blend? And you know what? The spreaders and stickers and safeners they put in to make it easier to work with and easier to mix with other products.
So if we're going to spend the money on these foliars, should we really be putting a lot of focus on the pH of the water when we apply them?
Absolutely. Again, same pH effect. if I have alkaline water and I put these micronutrients in something that has a pH of 7, 8, they're not going to be taken up by the leaf nearly as well. I want that 4 to 6 pH in my water, or 6 to 7 at the most in my water pH when I put foliars on. We can't do that with potassium carbonate and boron because they're alkaline. But the other ones I want to buffer it down, just like you would a fungicide.
Bill, Mercer County waters, Western New Brunswick, where would we be?
Well, it ranges quite a lot.
Say raw water.
7.4 to basically a little higher than that sometimes. But up north it's even higher.
Now, something you have to understand. A company like Yara, for instance, with their micronutrients, they put an acidifier in there. So sometimes just putting their stuff in your tank with pH of 7.4 will bring it down to that 6. Okay? But anytime you're spraying water on a plant, I don't care if you're using fungicides or insecticides, you need to be bringing that pH down, because all the products you use, herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, a lot of them are prone to alkaline hydrolysis. And that's that they lose their half-life once your pH goes over 7. All right? So conditioning your water is really important. You don't want to get acidic, but you want to be at least between 6 and 7. All right? Is that kind of what you're getting to? Yeah.
My question goes back to your boron and how you're saying it's quite safe, more safe than we thought, probably on a wet year. But what's your recommendation on an extremely dry year?
In boron.
Really?
Boron and magnesium both, but boron particularly is taken up by respiration. So I can have lots of boron in the soil and put lots of boron in the ground, and if I have no moisture, I'm not getting any respiration and boron moving by xylem. So when it's hot and dry, I have to use more foliars. Okay? So something to think about when I'm going to talk a little bit about here, when you start putting fertilizer programs together, and you look at the competition between the elements. And when we put recipes together, we've got to start thinking about this antagonism and synergism. But when we talk about Mother Nature, if it's hot and dry, anything that moves in the plant by mass flow, calcium, sulfur, boron, magnesium, big time, we turn the tap off, we turn off the flow. So you can have good boron levels in your soils, you can have great boron and magnesium levels in your soils, but if it's hot and dry, you've only got one choice. You got to foliar feed it, because it's not coming up this way. And when you foliar feed, if you got a little bit of boron or magnesium in the soil, and you foliar feed, you get better efficiencies out of your ground of life. So they work together. But hot and dry conditions with those elements I just talked about, you have uptake problems. See, Mother Nature's messing with you all the time. But if you understand the physiology and understand the chemistry, you wake up in the morning and it's cold and wet. First thing you should think about, that crop you just put in the ground, how's it suffering?
So going foliar with boron on the very hot, very dry, what would your recommendation be?
Quarter pound actual, as soon as possible. Check the petioles in a few days and see if you made it. You might have to come in again. If it stays hot and dry, you might have to keep doing it. The other thing too, and we call it leaf feeding versus foliar feeding. If I have hot, dry conditions and I'm not getting the rainfall, but I want to keep those root systems alive, just going out and spraying a triple 20 on that field with a little bit of urea will keep the sugars moving in the plant. It won't correct deficiencies, but it'll keep the sugars moving in the plant so that when we finally get rainfall, my roots haven't gone dormant. So I've saved a lot of crops in hot, dry conditions that didn't have irrigation by just going put 5 pounds of triple 20 in the tank with a little urea and spray that field. Okay. Sounds like magic, but it works. Yeah.
What about when it's really hot? 90 plus, should you be cautious with boron, leaf burn?
You should be cautious with anything, and you should always spray in the morning or evening.
But should you be more cautious with the boron? Because we've seen the leaf burn even when it's not 90. At a big shot with the spreader sticker, you can see the burn.
With boric acid?
Well, I don't know, boron Bill.
Boron Bill? I haven't seen that in spraying early morning or evenings from the.
But even if it's not hot, that full sunshine, when you're going to get sun all day, and that sticker really makes it stay on the leaf. Should you dial it back and do it more? Instead of doing a quart, do a pint, and do it twice in a row instead of one big shot, one meal?
No, if you're concerned, I would say go later in the afternoon so you've got the evening and over the nighttime for your work. If you go less than a quarter pound of actual boron, you're not putting enough on to do anything. And a lot of people go, I put a quarter pound on, or I put a quarter of a pint on, I'm not getting anywhere. Well, if you're putting less than a quarter pound on, you're not going to do anything.
That's
even if you spray it more?
What's that?
Even if you spray it more? Say you do it every week instead of every other week?
Even if you spray it more. Yeah. You're just not getting enough on at one time.
Now, one of the plot results that we have will show smashes of nutrients do more than slow feeds.
But don't do it
Just
over there.
better uptake?
Yeah,
It's concentration on the leaf. It's total concentration, yes.
How much urea can you put on? You take a year like we lost so much nitrogen that we did this year. How much urea can you spray on that foliar crop in one great big smash to try to make up? Because we were just pummeled by moisture and we lost so much.
Well, you should never put more than 5 pounds of actual nitrogen on from urea at any time because it's phytotoxic.
Is urea the best product non-foliar?
No.
What is?
Last in.
Then why do you keep saying urea?
Just because you guys are in the room.
I'm just trying
No, I tell you why. I've used urea.
What's the difference between last in and urea?
Oh my God. It's safer and
why?
I'm not. It's just the way it's made up. It's made up with.
Urea is cheap.
I know, but I'll tell you what. I've been using urea on strawberry crops. I've been using urea on strawberry crops forever in season because I want to keep the nitrogen going in the strawberry crop. And I use it 5 pounds with, I'll put on some triple 20 with it. And then I switched to last end when it came out just because it was safer to use. And I went down to about a fifth of the recommendation. Got just as good a results. So I got away with a lot lower levels of using last end and did as good a job. So it was actually cheaper and safer to do that. So it works, and it does a fantastic job with potatoes. Not suggesting you down to
last end's cheaper than urea?
No, the way I was doing it, rather than go their full weight, what was it, a full gallon or whatever it is, through the acre or whatever it is, I went to a fifth of the recommendation. I still get results.
To answer your question though, like 2.5 gallons, there's how they would use that when it's hot and dry to keep them going, or if they thought they were short on nitrogen. And really the biggest difference is between that and urea is there's multiple sources of nitrogen in there for different release points.
Yeah, but urea is the most
cheap,
the quickest transfer for the plant to do.
Yeah.
Am I wrong?
No, well we have urea in that product, and it has a little bit of a lower salt content, right? So you can spray higher amounts without risking that phyto. So we would have something with, say, a chain this long, so it'll immediately release. Then we have a longer chain nitrogen, so it'll start feeding, over longer periods of time to the longest chain, which could give you up to say 10 days, maybe 14 days, kind of on the long end, but it gives you a bit of the immediate release and slower release.
And you'll see, using that over just using urea, I'm using a much lower. I'm not saying that's what you should do. I'm using much lower recommended rate. And the reason I do that is I'll put urea on with any foliar feed I put on at a low level. And the reason for that is the plant is taking in these nutrients, these foliar nutrients, and it's going through the cuticle of the plant. So you got a hot, dry condition, particularly your cuticle can get really thick. But if you put some urea in the mix, it derives the foliar feed into the stomate, and the cuticle thickness in the stomate is much thinner, and I get better penetration. And I don't get that stomate interaction unless I have a little bit of urea in the foliars. So I always mix a little bit of urea, now last in, with my foliars just to get that activity. So yeah, I've used urea forever. The question was, how much can we use? I use 5 pounds. I went to last in because it's safer, and I could use a much lower level and still get the effect.
But what makes last end safer?
Just the way it's formulated.
Yeah, and part of it is too, like with urea, when you put it on, when it dries out, it's pretty well done feeding, and it talks about like point of deliquescence, so we put a humectant in it, so it'll draw the humidity of the day basically back into that product, so it keeps re-wetting itself, so it can keep on feeding, so you don't get those nitrate spikes in the plant, it's just kind of more of a consistent bell curve over time.
And that's what I was trying to get to when I said the product differences. If you don't have the chemical that has that natural point of deliquescence, I know that some companies like Yara put a product in there that gives it that better point of deliquescence. So if you know the company and you understand what they're doing, like Alaskan, they're putting that compound in there to give it a better point of deliquescence. That makes sense.
And you're right, Rick, you said with urea giving a smash. Urea will give you a smash when you hit it. You'll see the field will green right up, but within 12 hours, that urea is pretty well gone, and the next day, probably 24 hours, you'll just see the white film on the plant. I'm not saying not to use urea, because I used it for 30 years, but it's just a white film left there, where the last day is, like Sean and Greg said, is formulated, that's going to feed that crop right through and hold it till the next spray. Because Greg did some work on the strawberry, for 10 days later, it was still holding the plant.
Yeah. And I was using a 50 recommendation.
So urea is out within 24 hours?
Well, it takes 24 to 36 hours to go.
Depends on how hot and dry it is.
How hot and dry it is.
Okay. All right, we've done with urea for a few minutes?
We've done it, we've used it for years, because that's all we have. Every company, like everything else, things are changing all the time.
Okay, I want to talk a little about nutrient interactions. When we put a fertility program together, I don't care if it's foliar or ground application, we need to understand this chart. This is Mulder's chart, and this is showing you the competition between all these different elements. The one you don't see on here is sulfur. The sulfur is a good guy. Anytime we put sulfur on, it actually increases the uptake of all the other nutrients. So it has no real antagonism. It actually is synergistic, except for molybdenum. Oops. Molybdenum, it actually competes with. So the more sulfurs I put on a field, I have an issue with molybdenum. But you know, when I was consulting and I put a lot of sulfur on berry crops and potatoes and stuff, I would just put a little bit of molybdenum in my herbicide spray, about half an ounce, and problem solved. So it's not a concern, but sulfur's a good guy. But when we talk about some of the things we do, and oftentimes you go to a coffee shop and your neighbor said they did this, and you go and use it and you have a yield reduction or something happens, it's because we have to pay attention to how these interact. When we talk about ammoniacal nitrogen, when we use it in excess, it actually competes with potassium, magnesium, and calcium. Nitrate competes with phosphorus, sulfur, and iron, but it also helps increase the uptake of calcium and manganese. So different forms of nitrogen have different impacts on certain elements. Phosphorus in excess ties up zinc, copper, and iron, although it increases manganese availability. Potassium in excess competes with calcium, magnesium, boron, and copper, but we already talked about that. Boron actually increases the uptake and utilization of potassium, so that synergism and antagonism is there. Magnesium in excess competes with potassium, calcium, and manganese, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on the manganese. Calcium in excess ties up a lot of nutrients. However, calcium is a secondary messenger. It actually is very important for the activity at the root surface and how the root actually functions to take up nutrients. So it actually assists the uptake of all the nutrients as well. Look at sulfur, I would say it's a good guy. Boron we talked about. So the point I'm trying to make here is when we put fertility programs together, or when we look at amendments, keep in mind with what you're doing, if I do something, I could be causing a problem. Now we're going to talk here about magnesium. Potatoes are a pig for magnesium. You just can't get enough magnesium in the potato crop. So we're going to talk about foliar feeding magnesium. We're going to talk about K-mag applications. But we have to pay attention to this one. Because this one here is important in how the shikimic pathway works, which is the immune system of plants. And it competes with, magnesium competes with it. So if I'm spraying a lot of magnesium on, I better be putting some foliar manganese too, because I can start causing interactions there. So we need to pay attention to the way this works. You with me on this? Okay? So we just can't go out and blast something on there. Notice the tissue sample says, look where your ranges are and how close you are on some of these competing elements, and make sure you address it. So when we talk about nutrient uptake and crop response, this concept's been around for a long time, and it's still widely viewed within the framework of crop yield responses to fertilizer application as a single element application. In other words, a lot of crop research and nutrient uptake is still looking at one element at a time. Today, that's changed. We're starting looking at this more holistic approach and how the synergisms and antagonisms work together. Root absorption capacity is deeply a feedback controlled by plant growth capacity itself, and therefore does not depend entirely on the soil nutrient availability. What's saying here is the plant's ability to communicate to what it needs is based on the yield the plant has and its relationship with some of the microbes in the soils, and that synergism between the plant and the soil microbiome and the nutrient in the soil itself. Okay, so we have to start taking a different look at how this whole thing works. Interactions among different nutrients in soils and plants imply that the availability of one nutrient for plants depends on the availability of others. Again, this whole nutrient concept. The plant itself influences nutrient dynamic process in soils through interactions with microbial communities. We're doing a lot of research work now in soil health where we can actually look at the nutrient balance and how the plant actually sequesters certain organisms in the soil to help it take up other nutrients. There's a concept called keystoning effect where the plant can actually produce these coumarins that it extracts from the root system, and it helps the plant go out and actually sequester or find a microorganism that can help it solubilize nutrients out of the soil that would not necessarily be available. Okay? So as we do a better job with total fertility and this whole holistic concept, these plants start working for themselves and start foraging more effectively. You understand where I'm going with this? So we're doing a lot of work on soil health, and this is something that's going to be new coming, and it's something that we should be aware of. Yes?
Greg, would you dare speak of a reduction of NPK at a fertilizer meeting that will facilitate the biology of soil?
No.
That's what I thought.
But I'll address
because every podcast I listen to talks about a 20 to 30% reduction in all three.
I'll address
two specifically, N and P.
I'll address that differently. The answer is no. We need to have a good balanced fertility program to make these plants be able to produce the compounds to feed and cultivate these organisms. So soil health is not going to happen. Increasing organic matter is not going to happen unless we have good balanced fertility. Now, on the other side, excessive use of nitrogen causes lush plants with very flimsy, lush leaf systems. We don't get starch formation the way we should. We get accumulation of amino acids that actually open the plant up to insect infestation and disease. And that's when we use nitrogen without the balance of the other nutrients. The reason why we're having issues with people challenging us with our overuse of fertilizers, and I must say that when people talk in the media about fertilizers, they're talking about nothing but nitrogen. Okay, they're not talking about feeding them. Now, you're in Maine, so we'll talk about phosphorus in a minute, so hear me out.
Two are focused on. It's the N and the P. Because we have an abundance of both. Of the middle, especially in our soil.
Well, let me qualify that here in a few minutes. So the answer to your question is, if I do a good job of balancing my nutrition and stimulating the things we are, my K to magnesium ratio is 0.25 to 0.35, my nitrogen use efficiency increases. It's not that I'm going to tell you to back off in your nitrogen use. We just can do a better job in recommending the right amount of nitrogen. Okay, so that's the key here. We're not paying enough attention to the soil dynamics in that ratio when we make nitrogen recommendations. It's a knee-jerk reaction to go to more nitrogen because it greens the plants up and it's a go-to. Okay? If we have to do that, we're not paying attention to the other stuff. Okay? So we are overusing nitrogen because we're not paying attention to the nitrogen use efficiency.
You think we'll put too much up front?
In most cases, we're putting too much nitrogen on in general because the system's not balanced. Okay? But it's not because we're doing it to have harm for the environment. That's what's working for us. We need to rethink it so that people don't tell us what we need to use. Okay? When it comes to phosphorus, I'm going to show you phosphorus in a minute here, because we have a real misconception about phosphorus use. I don't care what state you're in, and we'll talk about that here in a minute, okay? So it's not we're overusing fertilizer. We're not using it effectively. I say that here because it's been a system where we've looked at individual elements and not looking at the whole thing. So simple terms means the entire system is dependent on nutrient balance and the interaction between soil, plant, and the microbiome. And once we understand that, we'll get to a point where we're not in a position where people can challenge us because we can demonstrate it. Okay? And I don't have time today to get into soil health, but we can actually measure endophytic nitrogen fixation within a plant where the plant can start fixing its own nitrogen. Now, that's not going to suggest that you quit using nitrogen, but I'm going to get better nitrogen efficiency per bushel produced, or hundredweight produced. I might use the same pounds per acre of actual N, but if I get everything balanced and I get these endophytes working, I'm getting more yield for what I'm using. At the end of the season, I don't have nitrogen in the groundwater, I don't have nitrous oxide being emitted. Okay, so it's efficiency of use, and we've done the research and we know where that is. But that's another whole topic. I want to talk a little bit about soil pH and calcium in low-level liming. And why I want to go here is that in potato production, we don't use the lime we should, we use the calcium we should because we're afraid of scab. Yes? No? Okay. pH and calcium does not cause scab. Nobody disagree? Question me? Okay. So we're going to talk about how we do this, and we're going to talk about the work we've done in low-level liming. And when we have scab-prone varieties and possible scab in a field, we're going to low-level lime to 45% base saturation of calcium until we correct the K to magnesium ratio, and then we'll come back and lime some more. Higher calcium levels in your field will give you better yield, better storage quality, better solids, everything. Okay? So it's something we need to work towards, but you need to understand how to manage it. And again, just some calcium-related disorders. This is precision lime application, looking at low-level liming. Things we have to be concerned about in potato production is how many people rotate with other crops? Grain, legumes. How many people have pHs down below 5 or below 6? Okay? When that happens, look where your AL3 is. If you're above 1% AL3, legumes and grains are damaged. You get uneven growth. So we start, this field has pHs at 6.1, 6.4, and a lot of potato growers wouldn't lime that field. But I have over 1% AL3. So any other crop we put in there, like grain and legumes, is going to be stunned. My base saturation calcium, 43, 59, I want to be a lot higher than that, getting the quality I'm looking for. But I get scab issues, so I've got to address that. This is what grain looks like when AL3 is above 1%. You can't put fungicides on that. You're not going to have a crop you can harvest. It's going to be garbage. Or soybeans. So we need to start looking at the impacts on other crops and this whole low-level liming issue. So I already said this. So when we have rotational crops, we got to look at that. And, again, potatoes respond to calcium, specific gravity, all that kind of stuff, marginal yields, all the things we're talking about. So DRT liming application to avoid scab issues. K to magnesium ratio on potatoes, we look at base saturation of magnesium between 10 and 20%. I want my K to magnesium ratio in that 0.3 to 0.4 range. It will not only excuse me, have an impact on scab, but it also has an impact on blight. And that's where it needs to be. So this is research that we've done. When I first started in labs, I met George Lazarowitz on my partner's farm. He's doing work on scab research. We've been doing scab research since 1984. We looked at how we could overcome scab in fields and what we could do culturally to do a better job at that. In 2007, we wrote an article in the Plant Pathology on scab control with this concept, and it's used worldwide now. So when we talk about low-level liming, we want to put lime on a field if my K to magnesium ratio is above 0.4, my scab potential will grow exponentially. My late blight potential will grow exponentially. And as I bring my K to magnesium ratio down between 0.3 and 0.4, once I get there, I can go back and increase my lime application to bring it up even higher, give me better quality. But if I don't pay attention to that K to mag ratio, let's jump that forward, and get it to this range here, I create those problems. And we're going to talk about magnesium at length here in a few minutes. But again, we can't be afraid of calcium in potato production because it makes potatoes. It gives us quality, it gives us specific gravity, and it gives us yield. But if we get about 45% saturation of calcium in a potato field that has scab issues, and our K to magnesium ratio is above 0.4, I can have scab. Okay, so we've got to manage that. And because we want to eliminate the aluminum, we'll low-level lime to 40 to 45% saturation so we can at least move forward for quality and get rid of that aluminum until I get the K to mag in this range, and then I can come back in and put some more calcium on. Are you with me on that? Yes.
Greg, if we get our potash too high, will we have more calcium absorption into the potato?
Yes, and not only that is, I don't think I have the charts on here that shows the research on our scab, but the actual correlation to scab, and this is research we did looking at scab issues globally. Every place we were growing potatoes for production, where we're using more and more potassium, we had more scab. And we looked at that, we had 7, 8, 9% saturation of potassium, and that's where the scab was. But when we get there, we got the K to magnesium ratio at 1. So we're screwing up the magnesium balance here. Okay, so we need the potassium for yield, and we want to keep putting it up there. But every time you do that, and you push that beyond this, you open yourself up to not just more scab, you open yourself up to more late blight. Okay? And that's what the research has shown us. And it's just the physiology and how the plant's taking nutrients up. But we don't pay attention to this balance enough, and we know that potash makes potatoes. So we keep cranking the potash to it. How many people, oh, you guys use K-Mag now, so you're putting some on, but we're not using enough. Okay? Yeah.
How do we increase our calcium levels in that tuber? Take potatoes and do a sample for calcium uptake in that actual potato. What's the best way to get that calcium buildup in that potato?
Have the potato laying in calcium.
Say that again.
Have the potato laying in calcium. So when I first started this company, my potato growers were growers for, or my partners were growers for Hostess Frito-Lay. And storage at that time for the varieties they were producing was a real problem. So we looked at research from around the area on looking at how we can increase calcium uptake by a root crop. And we went to using a gypsum. We actually put it in the fertilizer box. And we put on 30 pounds to 50 pounds of actual calcium from gypsum in the potato hill. And we got calcium into that hill. So if you don't want to lime, and you can't lime right now, and you're afraid of some of this, you can use 30 to 50 pounds of actual calcium from gypsum in your band starter, your fertilizer starter mix, and you will get calcium not only in the potato, but the whole business about soluble calcium to make the root system work better, you actually get better nutrient uptake because you got soluble calcium activating the root system. So when I make a recommendation for potatoes, and particularly potatoes I'm going to store for a length of time, and my calcium levels are low, my base saturation is low, and I can't lime because I'm worried about this ratio and other issues, I'll recommend 30 to 50 pounds of calcium from gypsum in my starter mix. Or if I'm going into storage, regardless of all that, I'll still put 30 pounds of calcium in the starter mix because they're going into storage.
Now, which product do you have has the gypsum?
Tropico, it's not gypsum, it's a different form of calcium.
That's calcium nitrate.
Calcium nitrate, yeah.
Just gotta buy gypsum, spread it like lime.
Okay, I don't want agricultural grade gypsum. I want a granulated gypsum that is at least 75% soluble. So it's a reconstituted gypsum that's ground fine and put back into a pearl that I can mix and blend in fertilizer.
Why
why don't you want spread gypsum?
So you can spread gypsum, but you can spread gypsum at a ton and a half. It's not as easy to work with. It takes a lot longer to dissolve and get into the plant. Putting 30 pounds of actual calcium from gypsum, so 150 pounds of product, in your starter mix does the job, and it's a lot easier to work with.
Greg, what are they doing to that gypsum product to make it so available?
They take agricultural grade gypsum and they grind it real fine and repelletize it.
Nick, is that a liquid or a dry?
It's not tropical.
Yeah, tropical something different.
In Georgia, they can't grow peanut without putting gypsum in the bed like that, or the peanut rots. And that's where we got the idea to put it in the row when we started doing the research on storage quality from the peanut growers in Georgia. Okay. Anyhow, I just want to go through this process here. This is how a plant takes up nutrients. This is how the plant actually activates the flow of nutrients in the plant. This is a salt, and the salt of choice is potassium. The plant takes that salt of choice, moves it in the plant to start that osmotic toll. We need to take up ADP, and that ADP needs to be converted to ATP, which is the energy drive for the plant, and it needs an enzyme that's synthesized with potassium, and it needs magnesium that it takes from the mitochondria to make that whole system. So we talked about K to magnesium ratio. K, mag, and phosphorus. This is how we make our phosphorus efficient, is by balancing that off. So that system is the whole process of life and energy in every cell and every organism on this planet. We can't do without phosphorus or we're all going to die. Okay? The organisms in the soil, their main role in life is to produce ATP. So ATP is converted into an energy storage organism. We talked about that in the whole photosynthesis thing. And then this simple chain of glucose that's going to be converted to carbohydrates in that whole process. So that is what you need to listen to and think about. Now we're going to talk about phosphate uptake by a potato, and we're going to talk about how we use magnesium to make sure that happens. Okay? Well, this is the research we did in scab production, or scab work. So here you see we're controlling scab by lowering the pH. This is PEI in Alston area. We've got a lot of scab issues. You can see here the main culprit here is potassium. We get to 8.6 and 7.6, we have a higher incidence of scab. But when we get above 0.4, we get scab even in Alston. PEI, we've got real issues. So the only way we control scab here is keeping our pH low. But when we get that 0.3 to 0.4, we have very little scab, and it doesn't matter what the pH is. That was the research that we performed, and that was what was published. And getting manganese over 40 or 60 ppm also helps us with scab control. So this is, I said this has been published, but this is just some of the findings of the research we did on scab. And that's actually the phytopathology paper that was published in 2007. So K-mag and plant health and potato production for scab. This is one of Emerson's little plots. He had a customer that didn't believe to him that we could control scab with that and give him better yield. He had them treat this field. They went up the middle of the field. I think it was 600 pounds of K-mag, and they didn't seem to think that they saw any difference. So Emerson backed his pickup truck up to her door with these two samples in the field, and said, "Can you see the difference now?" And I don't know what she told me, but nonetheless, that was the results of the treated side. 318 hundredweight. The check 204 hundredweight. There you can see the scab versus the treated. See, so we've done this over and over and over again in trials. This is the trials looking at K-mag applications at 20 and 40 pounds. The outcome in yields. This is a field where we just put 20 pounds on. That was what the field looked like in the treated and untreated. There's the yield difference in hundredweight per acre and the return on investment. Now we say that was the return in plot 2, but I question whether or not we'd even be able to sell that untreated piece. So So we've been there, done that, but just pointing here as I'm trying to look at, how can we deal with some of these production issues. Any questions on that so far? So again, calcium does not cause scab. pH does not cause scab. pH can control scab. High potassium, low magnesium causes scab. And we can control that. Okay. So we're going to go into understanding plant analysis and how to use that. Again, we want to look at issues with tissue sampling when you use it. Visual deficiencies, if you're looking at visual deficiencies in a plant to look at what's going on, it's too late. They're already there, damage is done, there's nothing you can really do. You can go spray that field, and you'll sleep better at night, but you're not going to fix the problem. We have hidden others we can't see that are robbing us from yield, particularly boron, because boron can be deficient and you really can't see it unless you're really good at finding it. And then these ones really concern me. These are the fields that get in good, they do really well, the weather's perfect, you're set up for a huge yield, yet that field does not have the nutrient power to take that crop home, and it'll fall apart late in the season. So we need to do tissue analysis on that to watch that, to keep topping the tank up so we don't get into trouble and finish that crop properly. Make sense? So when you look at a plant analysis, this is an early season tissue sample. I want all these nutrients in the sufficient zone going out the door. So I want them all these, think of these as gas tanks of each of these nutrients. So I want them all full when I start this crop off. And as this crop performs, these tanks of nutrients start to drop off. We use the tissue sample to see how far they're going, and I want to come in and top these tanks up before I get to this deficient zone, or what I call the point of no return. So that's what we use this for. If you have a crop that comes in mid-season and everything's in the good zone, I don't have to go to that field. You got no crop. Crop's not using the nutrients. If you're doing a really good job producing a crop, this should drive you crazy because you'll have a hard time keeping up to it. Make sense? So this is a fuel gauge on that crop you need to understand. So here we have an early season tissue sample of potato production. We're talking about dry PDO analysis, so I'm not going to go there, just to show you what part of the plant it is. You guys have this done for you most of the time, but that's what we're looking for. And then, again, our foliar program needs to be proactive. And again, think about each of these little bars as fuel gauges for that nutrient in your crop. And then just showing you the timing of taking it. At A&L, we have what we call a plant monitoring program. You register early, and every time you send a sample in from that same location, it's added to a chart, and it gives you the trend lines and the little graphic interpretations of where that nutrient's going through the season. So you set that ahead of time. So what we look at in potato production, this is phosphorus. In a sandy soil, our phosphorus needs to start someplace like this, and then it will drop off gradually like this over the growing season. When we look at, we've already seen that, but we look at this tissue sample here and understanding how this works. We talked about this whole relationship here and how potassium and magnesium help phosphorus utilization within the plant and how we can manage that. And then we also have to keep in mind that magnesium is also the center of the chlorophyll molecule. So that process of photophosphorylation and the conversion of phosphate, it competes with magnesium as chlorophyll. So if the plant picks up the fact that it's low in magnesium in the soil, so magnesium is short in supply, the plant will start robbing magnesium from chlorophyll, or from photophosphorylation, and storing it in chlorophyll to stay green for as long as it possibly can. So you see a potato crop up there that's dark green, it's likely magnesium deficient because it's storing it in chlorophyll. And that'll continue to go up, and then it'll just crash. So you get early dying and just the leaves senescent fall apart. So we look at understanding that. Again, plant analysis is subjective in that the results of the analysis are indicative of the biomass of the crop. In other words, just listen, the bigger the crop, the lower the analysis the faster that analysis drops. So a low analysis may be due to rapid growth of crop nutrients or diluted by the increase in biomass. Many labs, when you took a tissue test up, they're using global averages. Our averages, our ranges are built based on our own crop in-field research. So that needs to be kept in mind when you look at ranges in literature or ranges from other facilities. They don't often use real field data, they're using averages. And that can be misleading. So let's take this potato crop here, and we're going to look at how that whole thing pulls together. This is a field that is early season potato crop. We see that magnesium is someplace around the sufficient zone, but phosphorus is actually low. So when you look at a tissue sample for looking at phosphorus availability, you need to look at the phosphorus-magnesium relationship. And I have to know the soil levels here as well. This field has 200 parts per million of phosphorus in it. This grower is using 150 pounds of phosphorus down the tube, yet he's got early season phosphate problems. He shouldn't have phosphorus problems, right? He's using 300 pounds of actual K from muriate of potash down the tube, no magnesium. His soil only has 3% saturation of magnesium in it. This is a magnesium deficiency, further exacerbated by excessive levels of potassium and no magnesium in the system. This magnesium will continue to go up, and the phosphorus will continue to drop off, even though there's lots of phosphorus in the system. So this crop's going to fall apart. You with me so far? When we look at any crop right at that flowering time, there's a big energy demand. We're using a lot of phosphorus and a lot of ATP energy produced from phosphorus to produce that flowering process. This is a melon plant. It's got all kinds of phosphorus deficiency. Insect feeding like this is an indication of low phosphate levels in the plant. So I know there's problems here. If I take that leaf off that crop and I hold it up to the light, I can see these tiny little yellow spots. This is the plant robbing the magnesium from the chlorophyll to facilitate that photophosphorylation. Now, if I have lots of magnesium in the system, these things go away. If I don't, they become necrotic sores and open places for infection where the crops are producing. Make sense? So the progress of phosphorus looks like this. Starting at the door here. Magnesium will start at the door just a little bit below that. Then it goes up like this. Magnesium and calcium at the end of the season end up higher, where other nutrients end up lower. Okay, that's just the way the biomass is put together. So that's what we want to see happen. If that line transects before that period of time at tuber initiation, this crop's in a lot of trouble. This crop's going to crash. And the magic number for potatoes is someplace around 0.8, 0.85, where I have to pull the trigger on amending that crop with some kind of foliar or magnesium source, or it's going to continue to go up, and I'm going to spike my phosphorus in the plant over and over again. So I want to keep this phosphorus level in the plant above 0.22 for as long as I possibly can. From the time of tuber initiation till the time it drops below 0.22, I'm producing 500 weight per day. We've calculated in the trials we've done. Now, if I have good dark green leaves and everything's going good, and I'm dropping phosphate fast, I can come in and put a foliar phosphate on that and still drive phosphorus in the tuber, even though I'm below 0.22. Because 30% of the total phosphorus that ends up in bulking that tuber comes from the tops, provided they're still green and they're active. You with me on this? So when we look at that sort of thing, that's actually a decent crop and things are working pretty good. So we have to kind of track that. When we look at phosphorus and magnesium together, I want to respond before that. When that thing gets close to 0.8, I'm going to start coming with foliar magnesiums, some kind of a magnesium amendment to drop that magnesium down and push that phosphorus back up. Does that make sense to everybody? So if we know how to read that, we understand that relationship between magnesium and phosphorus and the whole ADP thing, there's things we can do. But we have to be aware of that physiology and how to interpret these tissue reports. Right? We use magnesium for row closure. And we know that this is a C3 plant, and it suffers from canopy temperatures above 25 degrees Celsius. So the sooner we can get this row closed, the healthier the plant is, right? Makes sense? If it's open, unless we plant it late and it gets hot and dry, and we're not getting that row closure, this crop's going to suffer. Are you with me on that? Agreement? So I got a crop that's not closed. I want to push some energy in that plant. So I'll go in with a little bit of urea and magnesium, and I can pump the energy of that crop to close those rows. So it's just a trick we can perform. Here's a crop here that we have a problem with right from the get-go. We already have the phosphorus magnesium inversion. We got 0.47 magnesium and 0.4 phosphorus. You can see here we're at 1.28 the next time we sampled. We're at 0.15 in phosphorus. We come in and try to rectify that with a little bit of magnesium application. It's still early. We bump the phosphorus back up to 0.31. We're going the right direction, but it may be too late already. This one here, we've got decent phosphate and magnesium. They're in the right direction. 0.56, 0.27, but we're dropping fast here. But you look at what's happening in this season, and we look at what happened here. We had a dry spell. Our boron was low to start with, but we dropped in dry spell to point, but it's a 16. You can see the impact it had on our potassium. Our phosphorus dropped significantly, and our magnesium started to ramp up. So we started an inversion here. We're at 1.2 here. We come in with some magnesium spray to bring that magnesium down and try to maintain that phosphorus. But again, we're probably too late. All right, so again, timing's everything. Here's a field where we got things in pretty good shape. 0.41 to 0.52, we see a nice gradual drop of phosphorus, a nice gradual drop of magnesium. However, getting close to bulking and finish this crop up, we've hit 0.86, initiate the magnesium foliar, drop the magnesium back down, and this crop keeps moving forward. All right? So if you know how to understand that whole thing, there's things we can do to respond to Mother Nature, the growing crop that we're dealing with, and make sure we can bring that crop home. We talk about magnesium and gravity. We know that every time we put magnesium on, we have about 5 points on the gravity for every 20 pounds of magnesium you apply to that field. So we have processors telling us don't use potash. It has an effect on gravity. It's not the potash. It's the fact that we've taken that K to magnesium ratio out of balance and we're not using enough magnesium to maintain it. Calcium has a bit factor there too. Magnesium has a big factor. Yes?
McCain's did a test one time because I asked him, I said, geez, I said, I want to try a test where, because they always said about the potassium hurting the gravity. So I said, I want to do a test. I want to keep increasing the potassium and see what happens. And so the lady that was working said, oh, no, we've already tried that. And once you get over a certain amount, then you don't get any yield response. It's actually worse. Well, what happened was they were increasing the potassium way high, but they weren't putting any magnesium. So
exactly.
Everything died.
That research plot, I got the papers, I got the data. The program was a huge fertilizer mix down the tube, 300 pounds of potash down the tube, which I never recommend. I don't go much above 100, 150. All muriated potash, no magnesium in the system. They induced gravity issues by overdoing the potash with no magnesium. So, you can make a plot say anything you want, okay? And that's what happened. I got the paper. That's what they did.
I remember that.
Okay, so magnesium keeps your gravity up. Potassium has nothing to do with gravity. But if you use excessive potassium to get the yields you're looking for, without the magnesium, you'll reduce gravity, and you'll likely cause scab. Okay? That's just looking at gravity and yield and magnesium and potassium. All right? Magnesium competes with manganese. Now, manganese is another thing I looked at a number of years ago with a crop consultant that was working in PEI at the time. He told me he did some trials with manganese. And he said, regardless of what your tissue samples say, Greg, I can respond to manganese. And I said, I got to agree with you, but most of our tissue data is skewed because of early season applications of fungicide that contain manganese. That manganese gets hung up in the cuticle wax and does nothing to feeding the crop. But in a tissue report, it shows up at 3 to 4 and 500 ppm. We do get response to manganese, if it's not from the fungicide, at 3 to 400 ppm in tissue. But oftentimes we have that first counter and we just don't know where that's at. So I said, Dave, yeah, I agree with you. We have manganese response. Manganese also plays a role in the shikimic pathway, helping this plant fight disease. When we put magnesium on, foliar, and we don't pay attention to manganese, not only do we suppress yield that manganese has a role in, but we cause more disease. So if you're spraying a lot of magnesium that we're talking about here, don't forget the manganese. Right? Just heads up. Spray drift. I know that doesn't happen to any of you guys. You never have spray drift issues, do you? No. If you do, or if you suspect you have, don't even think about worrying about it. Get the sprayer out and put a little triple 20 with some zinc and manganese on right now. Even if it's glyphosate drift, we've seen it fix the problem. Okay? So this is just a reactive thing saying, my God, the wind was going the right way, I just sprayed my neighbor's field with glyphosate. Okay? Ranges we want to see in our fields are transition metals. They compete, as we said, with one another. I want to have five part mineral zinc. Zinc is important. So let's talk about zinc and boron. Zinc forms indolic acetic acid in the plant, which is responsible for all your meristematic growth, your root growth, your tuber size, the cells produced in your tuber, your leaf area, all that stuff. And I want to see it at 5 part mineral soil, but I want to see it in the starter mix because it's making that indolic acetic acid. But indolic acetic acid in plants can be toxic. So the plant has a built-in mechanism to regulate the indolic acetic acid in the plant. And that's a compound called indolic acetic acid oxidase. Now, in boron deficient plants, indolic acetic acid oxidase is overactive. And it basically negates all the indolic acetic acid, so I get poor meristematic growth. So I want to see boron and zinc in a planter mix together to help that regulation. So I want 60 parts per million of manganese in my soils ideally or better. Iron we've got lots of. Copper I want to see someplace around 3. We have copper deficiencies in most of our potato crops anymore. We're having skin quality issues, and it's a copper problem. I put a talk on about 25 years ago to a group up in Pontypool in Ontario, and the grower said, and he was a seed grower too, he says, have they done something with Burbank genetics? I said, I don't think so. What's your question here? He says, I can't get them the skin to set anymore. This just won't happen. And I said, well, what's your copper levels? He says, why would I worry about that? What's your copper levels in your soils? He said, well, I just noticed this in the last few years. I said, well, how long ago did you quit using bluestone? What's bluestone? Nobody here never heard
Copper sulfate?
Copper sulfate. We used to put copper on potato fields like crazy. And we got skin set. We don't do that anymore. So the copper levels are dropping. This is something I just got the other day, and that's looking at manganese response in yields and quality. So we definitely know there's a manganese response, so we got to pay attention to that in the tissues as well. Okay. Any questions? Yeah.
Greg, you made a comment on copper.
Yes.
Like copper and fungicides, is that created equal to elemental copper? Is that the same? Does the plant take that up the same as?
No, most of our manganese and copper that's used in formulation of fungicides is a formulation such that it gets hung up in the cuticle wax and actually doesn't get into the plant. It's more of a chelated form. So it gets into the plant. If the leaves fall off the plant in compost and get in the soil, we can give you some of it, but not per se from the fungicide.
Are you talking copper hydroxide?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're not getting copper from fungicides that is beneficial for the plant.
No.
So that's the fallacy.
Yeah.
Greg, I saw you 6 years ago in Woodstock, New Brunswick. I think Heartland Agrimark, and I learned so much from you. What I want to hear is your thoughts on sap analysis and where that's going. I don't know if A&L does that. I've done a lot of research on it, hours of research, and it intrigues me because I think we're going to learn more from sap analysis quicker than we will tissue analysis. It's like they tell me it's like a blood sample of the plant like we would take of ourselves. Talk to me about that. If you don't do it, then don't speak of it, but give me an opinion.
Give me more than an opinion, I'll tell you the research I've done with sap analysis. Because we can do it. And I had a grower that grows greenhouse cucumbers, and he had a company come by and say, they offer him sap analysis, do we do it? I said, well, we can do it. It's not difficult. I've used sap analysis in the field as a consultant just for a quick test in the field to kind of see what direction it's going. And I can squeeze sap out of a cucumber leaf pretty easy with a pair of pliers and a garlic press. But I can't get sap out of small leaves. You try to squeeze sap out of a potato leaf. I dare you. Okay, just hear me out. So I went to this greenhouse grower and said, look, if you think sap analysis work for you, let's do a trial in your greenhouse. We'll go through a whole year of crops, 3 crops, a couple different varieties for the whole year. We'll compare sap analysis to tissue analysis. And we'll look at fruit, we'll look at quality, we'll look at yield. And I says, if you think this is going to work for you, I'll actually set up a sap lab in your greenhouse that you can calibrate with my lab, so you've got that quick test. So the first couple of months into it, we already determined the sap analysis was not consistent and he couldn't use it. So he said no. But we continued the whole year. The problem with sap analysis is because it's difficult to get sap out of all crops, there's no standard method to squeeze sap out of leaves. So big leaves like cucumbers and big petioles that you can squeeze the sap out of easy, we can run that on the spectrometers because yes, we do it in the lab. But small leaves like grains and smaller leaves even like a small grain crop or soybeans or fruit crop, you can't get sap out of that. So what these labs are doing is they're taking the leaf tissue and they're adding it to about 500 mils of distilled water, putting it in a blender and macerating it all and calling that sap. So there's no standard method of doing sap analysis. Now, as a field guy and a consultant who uses a field, I used to carry little sap testing meters. I used to take a big set of needle nose pliers so I could crank down on it, because believe me, I destroyed many garlic presses. And I would use it as an indicator. I wouldn't make recommendations by it, but it would lead me the right direction. But I was only using drops in a small little Horiba sap tester. I wasn't using a spectrometer, so I have issues there. So, yes, we can do it. Do we do it? No, because I can't get the same results I can get from a good tissue sample. Is it faster? No, because I can do a tissue sample in 24 hours.
So even time of day and all that stuff, it doesn't matter.
Time of day doesn't matter with sap test. Big
right.
time.
Well, I guess that's the point.
Yeah.
It has to be the same time of day, but still not.
When we take our samples for Nova Crop Health in Netherlands,
yeah.
we have to take it before 9 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And we're air freighting it to them.
Yeah.
And they are, in my opinion, 10 years ahead of anything that's been taking place, because they are under a lot more scrutiny than we are as farmers now. And if you watch your YouTube videos and watch what the farmers are doing in Europe right now, that is what's driving it. So
if it's working for you,
you've learned a lot from sap testing.
If it's working for you, I have no problem. But
I'm not saying anything works for me. I want to learn about something else other than petiole testing that we have made no recommendations. I can't say of anything we've done in season on a petiole test. We might make a season change next year.
But you should be doing that in season.
We are not making changes in season. And if anybody else is doing something different, I want some advice from somebody else. We aren't making in-season changes on petiole.
I just went through how to use the petiole test and how to use it in the season.
I understand. And we are not, and we've got an agronomist that works for us, and Bill works with us.
Yep.
We are not making in-season changes.
We should be. And again, getting back.
I agree.
Getting back.
We're within range every time we send them in to A&L.
Okay. Okay, that's good. That means you're doing something right.
I'm not seeing results.
But are you doing it in all the stages and following it?
Yes, we're doing it every week.
Okay.
Spend a lot of time and money doing it.
See, sap analysis was where we were 35 years ago when we didn't have the ICPs and the technology we have today. So it's older technology that's coming back.
Sap analysis is not older technology. They're doing it in California, in Salinas Valley, on fruit crops. And they're saying they're getting 4 weeks quicker results than they would if they were doing tissue sampling.
Well, we turn around 24 hours, so I don't understand that.
They don't see it until 4 weeks later if they're doing tissue. If they do one, they're not seeing the results until 4 weeks after that time has passed. It's a long time.
I've used sap analysis, and I don't see it.
Bill, could you speak on this? You preach of sap analysis. Do you have some opinion?
Well, the opinion is, I mean, there's nothing determined. We've only done for one season. I've seen some results for 2 seasons. But the whole thing is that we went through this a couple weeks ago with someone, and there's some things that were picked out, yes, but as far as being as accurate as petioles, no. Honestly, no.
So sap analysis, if you don't have issues with the time of day, they can give you some really good results. And you get the right sap and it's ran on the right piece of equipment. They do work. But what my finding was in the trials we did is they were not consistent.
They're testing old leaves and new leaves and testing the difference between the two, correct?
Yeah.
Explain a little bit. Educate me. Educate me, Greg.
So we are taking, on all of our tissue analysis, in all of our ranges, depending on the crop.
That doesn't take an old leaf and a new leaf.
Just hear me out. We take a selected leaf based on what we know is the most efficient understanding of the crop nutrition of that plant at that time. It could be the most recently matured leaf. It could be the 8th leaf down from the top, depending on the crop we're dealing with. The thought process is with an old leaf or a most recently matured leaf, and comparing that to a new leaf, and we do have tissue samples where we compare the two. If I have lower levels in the new leaf than I have in the most recently mature leaf, I know I'm running into trouble because I should be higher levels.
But I don't do that in a tissue sample.
You don't do old and new?
No. Do you, Bill?
Yeah, that's exactly true. Then you can figure out where the plant is.
But how do you know that you're not getting the nutrients you sprayed on that leaf in that sample? You don't.
No, you don't.
If you make that application and you don't see
But
that.
I don't know enough about the process of getting
If
that.
you sprayed magnesium on it, you've got magnesium in that.
Yeah, well, we're sending the whole.
That's going to show up in your sample after your next spray, and you're going to look like a hero.
We don't recommend that you spray a crop and take a tissue sample within the next 2 days because you will get contamination, and we know that. So you don't do that. Within 2 days, the plant has absorbed most of the stuff on the leaf tissue anyhow. So we're taking tissue samples when we know that we haven't got foliar contamination.
So what don't you like about sap analysis? Just educate me.
Just the inconsistency that I've seen. Sometimes it works.
What causes that?
Moisture in the plant, time of day.
And how would that be different than tissue analysis?
Because we're looking at, in the tissue analysis, we're looking at the
moisture doesn't change.
You talk about the dry matter.
We're drying the tissue up. We're looking at the nutrient analysis in the leaf material. Sap analysis is you're looking at squeezing the juice out of the leaf and looking at what's in the phloem at that time. And that's kind of the difference. When we use petiole test, and why we go to petioles where we can, is nutrients are responding better in the petiole than we would in the leaf. So we're getting information out of the petiole that has a different concentration of nutrients than the mature leaf, if you will. And I've walked fields and I've used sap analysis as a consultant because I like the speed of doing it, I like the control of doing it. I couldn't get consistency.
What about Brix numbers? Does that mean anything?
I use Brix numbers and refractors all the time when I walk in the field.
Why aren't we using it here in Maine?
I don't know.
Bill?
We're just learning about this. This is a new science to us, honestly.
Okay, let me talk
It's
about
new to us.
I'm just learning about it. And it's not new. It's 10, 15 years
Let me
No,
talk
but
about-
it's new to us.
Using a refractometer is old business. When you use a refractometer, I'll tell you how I use it. When I walk in the field and consulting with my growers, I'm trying to explain to them that if they're proactive with a tissue program, they can solve a lot of problems. But they're not out there taking tissue samples all the time, but they're walking their fields and looking at their fields on a regular basis. Whenever I go to a field, my growers know that I always have my refractometer in my back pocket. So I'll tell you a story about me going to an onion field, and the growers called me down to see their crop because they were in trouble. And I got there, and we were going to take some tissue samples, and they wanted some correctives. And they said, get your refractometer. We got to see what this looks like. So I got it out. An onion should be somewhere around 11 on the sugar bricks. And I squeezed it, and it came out around 5. And they said, yeah, that's kind of what we expected. They said, so we took some samples, and I said, I think it's calcium, because we're having a problem this year on onions, and onions are really spot. So just get some foliar calcium. I'll take a tissue. We'll have that confirmed by tomorrow morning. So, well, we got to show you this really good crop we got. So we drove down the road to this crop, beautiful looking crop of onions. Driving up, I saw there was not as beautiful as they thought it was, although it was nice and green. And I said, yeah, I want to show you something. So I took the refractometer out, and I squeezed the juice on the refractometer and said, look at that. You're actually lower in that field than the bad field. So it's not that the crop was bad, it's the crop was ready to crash. I says, you need to get at this right away. So refractometer does, and you know the bricks, how to read the bricks. It does tell you that you're heading for disaster really quick. So it's a real quick reference tool. Reading refractometer, have you used a refractometer?
Absolutely not. That's why I'm asking the question.
When you look in the lens of a refractometer, you're looking at the bricks line. The bricks line will be kind of a shadowy line between where it should be.
30 is a good number in a bricks number, correct?
What's that?
30 is a good number in a bricks, right?
I've never seen a 30.
Exactly. But I've heard him talk about it.
Okay.
That'd be a good number, right?
I've never seen a 30, but crops all have different bricks numbers. They go from, carrots will be a good number. Like a carrot itself would be around 7 or 8. A lot of fruit crops around 14 or 16 would be a good number. 30, I'd have to look at what crop it's. Anyhow, the point I'm trying to make is when you look at the refractometer, you should have a hard time defining where that line is. It should be kind of a shady, between the clear blue and the light blue, it should be kind of a shady line and you kind of guess where that line is. That's a good number. If that line is well defined, even though you're in the right bricks number, you're still in trouble. It's ready to crash. So using the refractometer is a very valuable tool in the field because it does give you a good understanding that as you're thinking about what should I do next, and you're not taking a tissue sample every day, it's a really good tool to look at where that crop's performing. I've got bricks charts like crazy, like I use it all the time. But, there's people that say refractometers don't work either because time of day affects it. And yes, it does. But it's a good tool to give you an indicator. So I fully think everybody should have a refractometer.
Hey Danny, are you going to get us some refractometers?
They're about $200 a piece.
Oh, that's no problem. That's no problem. That's what you're going to get me for the little baby shower.
Yes.
Just what every baby needs.
You ever get up those fields and just wonder, where am I at? I mean, it's a simple tool, really easy to use. And, it says, well, the bricks chart says I should be here, and ooh, I'm not there. What's the problem?
So basically, it's carbohydrate production, sugars or whatever, and the more you have, the more healthy the plant is.
But it's a combination of all the nutrients. It's not just one. You can't say, well, that's calcium, that's potassium. It's not where it should be, so it could be anything. Okay. But it leads you to understand that I got to do something.
Okay. Greg, would you educate us about a PLFA test?
A PFLA test?
Like fats, lipids, acids.
We do soil health, and we have a soil health test. We can get into that.
What does that mean? I've been hearing it on podcasts, and I don't understand.
It's a test that labs do to measure different proteins and stuff in soils to tell you they can predict what microbes are there and if it's a healthy population or where you're at. So it's a test, but it's not definitive. Okay, so we don't do it. We do our soil health test, and we actually do a biological test that we plate out all the organisms, so you actually know what the concentration is of your Pseudomonas, your Actinomyces, your fungi, your bacillus. We actually do that test, and we have charts and algorithms that compare it to one another. And then we have our soil health test that doesn't give you those numbers, but there's a soil health index that is based on research that looks at what organisms well, there's 487 different parameters that's in our soil health index. And we know you go from 0 to 29, it's not a lot of difference. There's a lot of biodiversity there, there's not a lot of difference. You go from 32 to 35. What we see happening with that test at about 35 is we see, when we measure the actual organisms, we see a whole bunch of bacillus start coming into the rhizosphere. And bacillus at 10 to the 4th in the rhizosphere is a population that plants can tolerate. Any more than that is actually a little bit toxic to plants. But we see that bacillus populations start to elevate when our soil health index is around at 35. And what we see after that, as we get up to 38, is the bacillus population starts to drop back down to 10 to the 4th, and we see rhizobium, Pseudomonas, and nitrogen fixtures start moving into the rhizosphere. So when we analyze the microbiome, we see that that diverse pool of organisms that was in the microbiome or of the rhizosphere at that lower soil health index is very diverse. But as this bacillus moves in, it gets rid of all the freeloaders because the plant knows it can't feed everybody, and it knows it's starting into a real productive zone, so it starts cleaning up the neighborhood so there's room for the good guys to come in, and it has enough juice to feed them and cultivate them. So we see this transition, and that's why we don't use a PFLA test, because it's not definitive enough for the work we're doing. So we offer you a soil health index that doesn't measure possibly the organisms, but the index tells you that we know what's going on. And there's charts and tables on there that as a grower, you do this, you move Pseudomonas. You do this, you move Rhizobium. You do this, you move nitrogen fixers. And as your soil health index gets up over 40, I now have endophytes fixing nitrogen, and my nitrogen use efficiency's gone up. And yes, I can back off on my nitrogen and reduce my greenhouse gas. I might use the same pounds per acre, but I'm now, per unit, I'm lower, if that makes sense.
So are guys using this test to judge their nitrogen use on their next crop?
No, because we have not built the algorithm. I've got 4 different algorithms for VRT application of nitrogen, which that's not part of it yet. I'm actually going through trials now to do that. We've got one using K to magnesium ratio that works very effectively. But this new one we're going to develop a soil health index can actually give you an estimate. I know that if I get to 42 on soil health index, I could probably reduce my total nitrogen percentage by 30%.
When are guys doing this test that you offer?
So this test, we first started out and we tried to be very specific on when to take it. Farmers to take it in about 30 to 40 days of growth. Going to rhizosphere plants. No farmers wanted to do that. It was a pain in the ass because I got to find the good and the bad spots. So we're taking it when we site-specific sample in the fall, and we went back and redid our research so we could come up with a better tool that was easy to take but give us the same information. So you're taking it when you do your regular soil sample. And you can do the soil health test 1, which is just that test that gives you indication, or you can do the 2 that includes the Haney test on there as well, all the Haney stuff. And then it gives you water soluble nitrogen and organic carbons. And then you can do the soil health test 3 that includes that whole microbial scan.
Do you guys do the Haney test yourself, or is what? Are you doing the actual Haney test?
Yes. We started doing the Haney test back before we started doing our soil health test. Nobody wanted it because it didn't tell them anything. But people that had been using it, started using soil health test, said, I still like to have that water-soluble nitrogen and carbon on the test. So we do that portion and put it on our soil health test, so people still have that as a barometer of where they were. And particularly people in the U.S. where they get subsidies for doing the Haney test, it's on our soil health test as well. So we do them both kind of together.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How often would you test for soil health test?
Our soil health test is designed to do it just like you do a soil sample, so every 2 to 3 years. Our soil health test is designed that you go out and look for a good spot in the field and a bad spot, so you can get a real comparison of what is making it good and what is making it bad. But again, when you read our soil health test and we tell you how to use it, I can tell you what population of Pseudomonas is there. I can tell you what kind of Rhizobium, nitrogen fixers is there just by the numbers. So it's based on a lot of research that goes in looking at, and we're only looking at what we call the key indicators, because the other ones don't mean a lot to us because we haven't tracked them. And it's all done with sequencing, so we sequence all these things. So we know, for instance, Pseudomonas is a very powerful antibiotic producer. And it's a very powerful phosphate solubilizer. But it doesn't even come to the party unless phosphate levels are decent. We know that, and this is getting back to your phosphorus question earlier, we know that phosphorus levels in you guys look at Bray or Olson over here. Okay. Morgan, so that would be kind of in between the two. So from a bicarb extraction, in Ontario, they want to see a 20 to 30 bicarb, which is what they call high. We know that 30 to 50 bicarb phosphorus is the sweet spot for Pseudomonas. We know if we get over 70 of phosphate bicarb, it's actually going the other way. So we know based on phosphate loading, what is the happy zone for a lot of these microbes. So when you get to phosphate and phosphate use, you get down to 15s and 20s, and even the morgans. You're now introducing a Pseudomonas strain into the rhizosphere that actually produces toxins and encourages Fusarium. So we know that we bring in some of the opportunistic organisms when our phosphorus load's too low.
So you check the actual colonies?
Yeah.
Okay.
We did it on the research. The soil health one is based on that research, but if you do soil health 3, we actually test the colonies. Okay?
So for soil health tests, like, should you take it in the potato here?
You can take it anytime.
But like before you plant the potato?
We suggest that. Yes. So you can do a spring and fall from the log test because we've calibrated it to that. But it's based on us actually analyzing the soil and watching these microbes change and looking at what influences them. We looked at, this is another whole topic, you got me going here now. Talking about boron, for instance, we know that our boron levels are low in all our soils. We know that rhizobium, now I'm not talking about nodulating rhizobium, I'm talking rhizobium in general, respond to boron. And we know that our levels are low. And we looked at this one trial with corn. Our corn tissue samples always come in deficient. We want to be 19 to 20 ppm of boron in corn tissues. It's never there. But in our trials, and this is 40, 50 farms across southwestern Ontario and into Michigan, we saw that as we got crops over 200 and 250 bushel, our boron levels went from 11s and 12s up to 20s. Never applied the boron to the field. So what we know is happening there is these plants are starting to exude these coumarins, which are signaling to the boron solubilizing organisms that come into the rhizosphere and start solubilizing boron that's not available from the soil otherwise. So we've actually watched the response of these organisms and these plants when they're talking, if you will, and this crosstalk that's happening, and this keystoning happening. So I mean, we've 2008 to now, we've done, and we have thousands of organisms. We got biologicals in the market now. But the soil health test, it's been proven, and we're the only company that's looked at soil health from how can we fix it rather than how can we grade it. So everybody else is looking at how many earthworms you have, what's your aggregate stability. Another thing, when you have a soil health index in the 40s, we now get polysaccharides being exuded from both Pseudomonas and Rhizobium that more moisture retention, more aggregate stability. So in a healthy soil, we get natural aggregate stability and we get better moisture retention.
So in your test, you don't have soil physical properties?
Oh, we can do that. But, I mean, how many farmers in here need to do an aggregate stability test to tell them if their soils are decent or not? You walk across your field with a pair of boots on, you know if it's accurate or not. I mean, we do it, but we don't get anyone asking for it. This is a research.
Greg, what are some of your solutions to fix that biology? I want to hear that. That's what we're striving for.
Okay, the soil microbes are fed by the plant. The plant cultivates these soil microbes. So if I have good nutrient balance within the ideal ranges, it's got enough plant food to, again, 20 to 60% of the photosynthetics a plant produces ends up in the rhizosphere to feed these organisms. Okay? So if we got good balanced fertility, the plant will cultivate these organisms. These bugs in the jug are indigenous. We found them in the field. We brought them in the lab, we cultivated them, we concentrated them, we put them in a pail, and we take them back out to the field. If you're getting involved with biologicals and you put them in a field, you'll see a green up every time. But if you don't have a fertility program to support it, they'll die and not go to harvest. So if you're going to use biologicals, you should also look at your fertility program to support them.
Who has the best bugs in the jug if we have our chemistry correct? Where can we get the best bugs in the jug?
A lot of them are good, but you've got to know how to feed them. Most companies that are selling them to you right now are saying, put this on your worst field to do wonders for you. That's crap. Because they're there already. You put them on your best fields, they'll do better for you. We have bugs in the jug. We have a company now that can distribute our bugs in the jug, our Bio 7s, our Bio 21s. We're not distributors. We're researchers and we're producing these things. And there's some really good organisms out there, but they're not telling the farmer they're selling it to how to help the plant cultivate them. So if you're going to use bugs in the jug, you better get an idea on how to balance your fertility program. Excessive nitrogen destroys that population.
Exactly. That's what I've listened to that, I've listened, and phosphorus.
No, no. Excessive
We
phosphorus.
have 1,100 pounds in our soil.
That's too high.
What do we got, Bill? In Aroostook County, Western New Brunswick?
It's all over the place. Honestly, we're 200-300
We're
pounds to
excessive.
1,000 pounds. Yes.
We're excessive.
Yeah.
You get up that high,
You gotta break the habits.
and I said it already.
Biology.
I said it already. You get up that high, I know where the sweet spot is for micro and phosphates. But in parts of the world, they want it too low. In some parts of the world, we've been pushing phosphate on potatoes because we haven't got that phosphate magnesium thing you figured out. We just know we need phosphate. We've pounded the phosphate to these crops because we've got aluminum fixation or whatever. And we've got it too high. So we've got to work on bringing that back down because it's causing problems. So, yeah, anything excess is going to be a problem. So, but we actually wrote a paper. Do you know James White from Rutgers University?
I watched this podcast 3 days ago.
Okay. He wrote a book not too long ago on the biological. We wrote chapter 23 on the nutrient levels and phosphate loading and stuff, and it's in his book. And it's all about where is that sweet spot for phosphorus, CEC, pH, and all that for the different microbes.
I'm a student at John Campy, and I think you know his name.
There, I know his name. He's okay, but he's a little bit that far.
Thank you very much for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you.